Welcome back to Paranormal M. Thanks for being here with me tonight. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Our first story tonight comes from someone who was visiting their grandmother near San Diego, and what started as a strange night alone turned into something they still can't fully explain. So get comfortable, relax, and let's get into the stories. I hope you all sleep well tonight. So just to give you a little backstory, my grandma had been renting a handful of different places around the San Diego area for quite a while. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I came out to visit her while I was still away at boarding school. A few nights into the visit, I started getting restless. I was bored, young, and not exactly making the wisest choices, so I ended up finding some psychedelics. It honestly wasn't that difficult. I got a strip of acid and some Molly, and at that point in my life, I was already pretty familiar with both. One night, I decided to party by myself. I know how that sounds, but at the time, I was feeling great. No weird energy, no bad thoughts, nothing heavy. I was staying at my grandma's house, and I wanted to go outside so I could call a few friends without being overheard. So I started walking down the stairs, just kind of amazed at how high I was, taking everything in. But as I got lower, I noticed something off to my left, right near the bottom of the staircase. There were 3 figures standing there. They were shadowy, almost smoky looking, and each one was a different height. They weren't solid exactly. They looked like they were made out of some dark vapor, just standing together in a row. And the strange thing is, I wasn't scared at first, not even a little. I remember thinking, well, this must be part of the trip. I had done these substances before, so I thought I understood what was happening. I even kind of laughed to myself. I might have said out loud, "I am so high." I walked down the rest of the stairs and moved closer to them. They didn't move. They didn't react. They didn't reach out or turn their heads or anything dramatic like that. They were just there, waiting at the bottom of the stairs. After maybe 30 seconds of standing in front of them, something shifted in me. That easy, playful feeling started to drain away. I remember suddenly thinking, wait, I've never had a trip like this before. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a hallucination. I reached my hand out toward one of the figures, almost like I needed to prove something to myself. My hand passed right through it, and the shape sort of broke apart, like smoke being disturbed. And the second that happened, this sharp bolt of fear shot straight through my body. It was instant, like my whole nervous system lit up. At that exact same moment, this bright, strobing light flashed from the kitchen down the hallway to my left. That was enough for me. I turned around and got out of there as fast as I could. The weirdest part is that the rest of the night was actually fine. I ended up wandering around the neighborhood, talking to friends, and somehow still had a pretty good night. But I never forgot what happened in that house. It stayed with me. When I got back to boarding school, I remember saging everything I owned because I had this awful feeling that I had picked up something dark. I don't really know how else to explain it. It felt like something had attached itself to me, or followed me, or at least brushed against me in a way it shouldn't have. And I know the substances make the story sound questionable. I completely get that. But I had never experienced anything like that before, and I have never experienced anything like it since. There was one more thing that really cemented it for me, though. A couple of days later, my dad and stepmom came to visit too. I hadn't told anyone what happened, because that would have meant admitting I'd been partying. They probably wouldn't have had a huge reaction, but I was still trying to look responsible in their eyes. One night, I convinced everyone to go out for sushi. I was sitting in the back seat with my grandma on the way there, and out of nowhere, she started telling this story about when they first got the house. She said she had gotten the real estate agent drunk one night, and the woman admitted something she apparently wasn't supposed to say. 2 other families had already backed out of escrow on that same property because they thought the house was haunted. They also complained about strange, rotten smells. Then my grandma just casually said something like, "Well, I'm not afraid of ghosts. I grew up in Connecticut in a haunted house. I hear footsteps upstairs sometimes, but it doesn't smell here, and it doesn't scare me." I think she also mentioned that they had checked for a skunk and never found anything, though I'll admit that part might be my memory filling in gaps. But hearing her say that, without me having told her a single thing, really locked it in for me. I probably could have brushed the whole experience off eventually, or blamed it on the drugs, but that conversation made it feel different. It made it feel real. And honestly, I still don't know what I saw. I just know that, even with everything I was on that night, it didn't feel like anything I had ever experienced before. Ever since I was younger, I've had this strange pull toward paranormal things. Not in a dramatic way, really. More like I've always felt there was something around the edges of life that we don't fully understand. I've had dreams about places I'd never been before, only to end up standing in those exact places years later. I've dreamed about moments that hadn't happened yet, and then, one day, they did. I could talk about those experiences for hours, honestly, but that's not really what this is about. What I want to talk about is something that has only happened a few times in my life, but every time it does, it shakes me to my core. I get these episodes where I become absolutely terrified of death. And I don't mean the normal kind of fear, like, one day I'm going to die, and so will the people I love. It's not that. It's heavier than that. It feels immediate. It feels like death is already in the room with me, sitting close enough to touch. There's never any warning. Nothing sets it off. I can be doing something completely ordinary, and then suddenly it hits me hard and fast. All I can think about is death, dying, the people I love leaving this world, what comes after, all of it. It feels like pure doom, and when it happens, the things that usually help me calm down don't touch it. Medication doesn't help. Cold showers don't help. Breathing exercises barely make a dent. The only thing that gives me even the smallest bit of peace is being outside. I know that probably sounds strange, but I mean it literally. I have to be near trees. I have to put my hands in the dirt. Sometimes I'll sit barefoot in the woods, just pressing my feet into the ground, trying to feel connected to something solid. Nature is the only thing that makes the fear loosen its grip, even a little. The episodes usually last around 4 or 5 days. Then someone close to me, or someone connected to my life, passes away. And after that, the episode just ends. Completely. Like a storm that vanishes all at once. The first time it happened, I was pretty young, so the memories are blurry. I mostly remember the fear, and then my grandfather passing away not long after. At the time, I didn't really understand it. I was too little to make sense of it. The second time was around 2019. Same pattern. No trigger, no warning, just that sudden, crushing fear. I spent days trying to ground myself, going outside whenever I could, sitting in the grass, touching the soil, trying to breathe through it. Then my childhood best friend Haley died unexpectedly. It wasn't something anyone saw coming. She hadn't been dealing with some long illness. It was sudden and awful, and it broke something in me for a while. I still miss her so much. But the strangest part was that as soon as I found out, the episode stopped. Just like that. The dread was gone. And now it's happened again. This latest episode started while I was grocery shopping last weekend. I was walking through an aisle, looking at completely normal things. Cereal boxes, fruit, canned soup. And then that feeling dropped over me. That same terrible certainty. That same sense that death was nearby. By the second day, I kept telling my husband, Evan, that I thought someone was going to die. I told him it didn't feel like regular anxiety. I know anxiety. This wasn't that. It felt like a warning, like something was coming closer, and I could feel the shadow of it before it arrived. On the 5th day, I slept in, and when I woke up, I felt normal, completely fine. The fear was gone. I remember lying there and thinking, maybe it really was just anxiety this time. Maybe I made it bigger in my head. 2 hours later, Evan called me, completely devastated. His grandmother had passed away earlier that morning. She had helped raise him. She was more like a mother to him than anything else. It happened suddenly, and because she had a DNR, they let her go peacefully. She was a wonderful woman. She raised a kind, strong man, and she meant everything to him. We're going to miss her deeply, but I can't stop thinking about it. I don't know what to call this. I don't know if it's intuition, or grief arriving early, or something my mind does that I can't explain. I just know the pattern keeps happening, and every time it does, I'm left standing there afterward, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. But deep down, I'm not sure I believe that anymore. So, this happened a couple of nights ago, and honestly, I still don't really know what to make of it. I've had sleep paralysis before. Usually it's small things, like feeling a light touch on my arm or something tugging at my foot. Sometimes it feels like there's this heavy pressure on my chest, almost like someone is sitting on me. But this time was different. This one felt worse than anything I've experienced before. That evening, I made the mistake of taking a nap. It was around 6:30 or 7, and I ended up sleeping until almost midnight. When I woke up, I felt completely off. You know that strange, displaced feeling after a long nap, where your body is awake but your brain is still floating somewhere else? That was exactly it. I was annoyed with myself too, because I had work early the next morning. I went out onto the balcony, smoked a cigarette, came back inside, and scrolled on my phone for a while. I think I finally tried to sleep again around 1:40 in the morning. At first, I fell asleep pretty deeply. I remember feeling comfortable, really comfortable. I was having a good dream too, nothing scary at all. Then, out of nowhere, I felt someone tucking me in. Not in a sweet way, not gentle. More like someone was carefully pulling the blanket around me, sealing me in. I could actually hear the covers moving. I felt the fabric being adjusted around my shoulders, my sides, my legs. Then came the weight. Something heavy pressed down on me, right on top of my body. And just as that happened, I heard a laugh behind me. I couldn't see who it was. I tried to make a sound, and all I managed was this loud, strained groan. I was hoping whatever it was would stop, or let go, or back off. But then I heard a voice. It said, "Shh, sleep." It wasn't soft. It wasn't comforting. It was stern, serious, like a command. That's when I really started to panic. Part of me thought, fine, maybe I should just go back to sleep. But another part of me got angry because how am I supposed to sleep after being woken up by something holding me down and whispering at me? The strangest part is that I don't think I was fully awake. I was still dreaming, but the dream was happening in my apartment. I could see my room. I could feel my bed. Everything looked exactly the way it does in real life. In the dream, I kept trying to turn around. I wanted to see what was behind me. I wanted to know what I was dealing with. But every time I tried to move, my body went numb and weak, and I would collapse back into the bed like all the strength had been drained out of me. Then I heard my window closing. That's what really set me off. I can handle being scared. I can handle strange noises, pressure, voices, whatever. But don't touch my window. I always leave it open a certain way, and hearing it shut made something in me snap. I woke up immediately and looked over. The window was still wide open. After that, I tried to go back to sleep, but it wasn't easy. I just sat there in bed, still tucked in, looking around the room and waiting for something else to happen. And then it did. I woke up again, except I was still dreaming. This time, I saw a swarm of tiny flies coming toward me. There had to be more than 100 of them. They were flying straight at me, circling around my face and body, almost like they were teasing me. It felt like they were saying, "You can't do anything anyway." Somehow, I woke up from that too. Or at least, I thought I did. Then I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I heard was footsteps coming up the stairs outside my apartment. Slow, careful, one step at a time. The hallway lights weren't on. Everything was dark. Then I heard a key being pushed into my door, slowly. But I always leave my own keys in the lock from the inside, so there's no way another key should have worked. I heard it stop, like whoever was out there realized they couldn't get in. Then the key was pulled out. Again, slowly. And after that, the footsteps went back down the stairs and faded away. I could keep saying, "Then I woke up again, then I went back to sleep." But the truth is, at some point, I couldn't tell what was a dream and what was real anymore. That was the worst part. Everything was happening in my apartment, in my bed, around my own things. Living alone has its good sides, but nights like that make the silence feel huge. The last thing I remember was looking around the apartment, trying to find whoever or whatever had been messing with me. And near the window, the same window I had heard closing, I saw someone standing there. Not a person exactly. A shadow, completely black, darker than the room around it, standing in the middle of my apartment and facing me. It didn't have eyes, but I could feel it staring. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, another nightmare started. Usually, when I have nightmares, they're about my father chasing me. I know that fear. I recognize it. But this was different. Being laughed at, tucked in, whispered to, surrounded, watched by something I couldn't even see properly. That felt worse. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it keeps happening. I just know it scared me badly enough that I haven't really been able to tell anyone. I lost both of my parents. My dad has been gone for 11 years now, and my mom passed away a little over a year and a half ago. I've always had really vivid dreams. That's been true my whole life. After my mom died, I moved back into my childhood home with my boyfriend, Nate. He's 26 and I'm 25. We weren't planning to stay forever. The idea was just to clean the place up, repaint some rooms, give it a little care, and then sell it. But ever since we moved back in, my dreams have changed. My dad has shown up in my dreams for years, and those dreams never really scared me. He usually runs toward me with this huge smile, like no time has passed at all, and we sit together and talk. It almost feels like catching up with him somewhere quiet and safe. With my mom, though, it's different. Every time she appears, her back is turned to me. My dad always comes toward me, but she's always walking away. I don't really want to pick that apart too much, because the dreams themselves aren't the part that worries me. The important thing is this: I never see her face. Not once. My mom died in that house, so at first I wondered if maybe she was still there somehow. I'd catch little glimpses of movement around corners. Sometimes I'd see what looked like her passing through the kitchen, always turned away from me. and it really did look like her. She was tall and slim, with hair she dyed a deep black for as long as I can remember. That is exactly what I kept seeing, a tall, thin woman with black hair. But again, never her face. Nate and I were talking about it yesterday because he's had strange experiences in the house too. We've heard footsteps at night together. He's seen shadows move where they shouldn't. So bringing it up didn't feel strange anymore. Then he told me he had seen my mom twice in the last few days. At first I thought, okay, that fits. That's unsettling, but it fits. Then he got quiet and said, she didn't have a face. He told me she had leaned her head around a corner and looked straight at him. But where her face should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just her black hair framing this blank white space. And he said it happened twice. That was when something inside me went cold, because I realized I have never seen her face either. Not in the house, not in my dreams, never. Now I'm not sure it's my mom at all. I don't know what is in this house, but I'm starting to feel like whatever is here may just be wearing the idea of her, or using the outline of her. And that feels so much worse than thinking my mom might still be around. For context, neither of us is on medication. Neither of us has any history of hallucinations or anything like that. We've both seen and heard things separately, and we've experienced some of it together too. Nate has been my best friend since we were kids, so I know he isn't lying to me or trying to mess with my head. Honestly, if he thought I was imagining it, he would tell me. I checked the carbon monoxide detectors first, and they're working fine. Even my dog reacts to it sometimes. He'll suddenly lift his head, perk up his ears, and stare toward the same hallway or corner we're looking at. So now I'm left with this awful question I can't shake. If it isn't my mom, then what is it? I've been thinking a lot about how much one person can affect your life, and honestly, it still surprises me. I don't mean just emotionally or mentally. I mean in a way that felt deeper than that, almost like something around me started shifting the moment she entered my life. About 4 years ago, I was assigned a support worker through an assisted living service. I'll call her Marin. At first, I didn't know what to make of her. She seemed ordinary enough, but after she became involved in my life, things slowly began falling apart. My finances started getting worse. My housing situation became unstable. Friendships and professional connections began to strain or disappear, and every time Marin came to see me, something bad seemed to happen not long afterward. I know how that sounds. I really do. But it was never just one thing. There were near accidents, injuries, people suddenly turning cold toward me, unexpected bills that drained my savings. I lost my old job when the company downsized. My landlady, who had once been reasonable, abruptly turned against both me and my housemate. And recently, something happened with my foot. I've always been someone who walks a lot, someone active, someone who needs that movement. But now I'm using walking sticks because of a strange injury that might be rheumatic. It came out of nowhere, shortly after I saw Marin again. The earliest thing I remember was with my official case manager. He had been kind to me in the beginning, almost fatherly in the way he cared. He listened. He made an effort. But after only a few weeks of dealing with Marin, something in him changed. I was there during the meeting, and nothing bad was said. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet afterward, it was like he simply gave up. On the work, on himself, and on me. Before Marin, I had received support for nearly 10 years without this kind of chaos. But after she came into the picture, one support worker after another seemed to burn out, quit, or withdraw. It felt like anyone who had close contact with her got pulled into some strange current of bad luck. There was also a doctor she came with me to see once. After that appointment, that doctor stopped taking me seriously. Even though I have rheumatism and several officially diagnosed physical conditions, she began blaming everything on psychological issues and refused to sign me off sick anymore. For a long time, I tried to explain it away. I told myself I was imagining patterns. I told myself life was just hard. But then Marin completely lost her temper with me, and something inside me finally snapped awake. I canceled her support. I removed her from my life. And then, almost immediately, things started changing. I began climbing out of debt. I started caring for myself again. My health became a priority instead of something I was too exhausted to manage. Material things began improving. Paperwork I had been waiting on finally started moving. Doctors began listening to me again. Most of all, my motivation came back. It felt like air returning to a room that had been sealed for years. That's why I don't think this was simply about her bad-mouthing me behind my back. It felt more energetic than that. I could feel the difference in my own body once she was gone. I felt lighter, freer, more myself. Now there's one final meeting tomorrow, and even though I know I'm strong enough to get through it, I can already feel that heavy uneasiness creeping back in. It's strange, because part of me feels steady, but another part of me is nervous in a way I can't fully explain. I know Marin works a lot with crystals and keeps herbs in her home, and I keep wondering whether there was something darker going on, something intentional, something I don't have language for. I'm not asking anyone to think I'm crazy. I just know what I lived through. The whole situation was bizarre on so many levels, especially the way that, only hours before this final meeting, the same dark feeling has returned. But this time, I'm not the same person I was before. This time, I know what it feels like to be free. I was in 8th grade when all of this started. Because of some family circumstances, I had to stay in a hostel for the first time. My mom was preparing to go abroad, and there really wasn't anyone at home who could take care of me properly, so I didn't have much choice. I was scared, of course, but I tried to adjust. For the first few months, everything was normal. Nothing strange happened. I slowly got used to the hostel routine, the noise, the shared rooms, the bunk beds, all of it. I slept on the lower bunk, and my bed was placed right in front of the door. I remember my aunt, Anita, once telling me that sleeping directly opposite a door can make you feel scared at night, or that strange things can happen. I didn't take it seriously back then. I thought it was just something elders say. But later, I started seeing something. At first, it was just a dark figure standing beside my bed. I told myself I was probably imagining it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was half asleep. So I ignored it. But then I started seeing it almost every night. It would just stand there. Quiet. Still. Dark. After some time, I began hearing a dragging sound too, like someone was pulling one leg across the carpet. That sound terrified me more than seeing it, honestly, because it made the whole thing feel real. I tried my best to ignore it. I didn't tell many people because I thought they would laugh or say I was making it up. But around that same time, I started getting sick often, which was strange for me because I usually don't fall sick easily. Somehow, months passed. Grade 8 ended, and after that, I didn't stay in the hostel during grade 9. Slowly, I forgot about what had happened. Or maybe I forced myself to forget. But then, in grade 10, I was put back in the hostel again. The next incident happened during my 3rd week there. One evening, it was already getting dark, maybe around 7. The hostel warden asked me to go to the main building and leave some notebooks there. So I went. That building was almost empty, and only a few lights were on. It had that heavy, quiet feeling, the kind that makes you uncomfortable even when nothing has happened yet. I was getting scared, so I started singing a song softly in my head, just to distract myself. Then, from somewhere far inside the building, I heard a female voice singing the same song. That was the moment my whole body froze. There was no one there. I looked around, but the building was empty. Completely empty. I got so scared that I quickly left the notebooks on the table. But when I turned around to leave, I saw a black figure standing there, looking straight at me. Even though the place was dark, I could still see it. Not clearly, but enough to know it was there. And more than seeing it, I could feel it staring at me. I ran back as fast as I could. That night, I could barely sleep. The next night, I went to fill my water bottle. The place where we filled water was just above our study room. While I was filling it, I suddenly felt that same presence again. It was so strong that I stopped immediately. I was about to leave the bottle and go downstairs when the window suddenly slammed shut. It was a sliding window. I know how those windows move, and I'm sure the wind couldn't have closed it with that much force. I turned off the light and looked back. Even without the light, I knew something was watching me. Then I realized it was standing near the same side where I had been filling water. It didn't have a proper shape, so I can't really explain what it looked like. It was just dark, like a shadow that didn't belong there. I ran out again. Later, we used to have night classes. My seat was right in front of the door, with my back facing it. During class, from the corner of my eye, I saw a black figure standing at the doorway. After that, I changed my seat. One night, around 8 or 9, the lights went out. I was standing near the door, and there was just a little bit of light coming from outside. In front of the door, there was a pillar with a mirror on it. Suddenly, I felt that presence again. I looked into the mirror, and there it was. That figure was standing in front of the mirror, watching me. So, this happened a few years back, when me and my roommate Jack were kind of between places for a little while. Not homeless in the dramatic sense, nothing like that. We just had this awkward stretch where our old lease had ended, but the new apartment still wasn't ready. So for about 2 weeks, we bounced into an Airbnb in San Antonio, just to have somewhere to sleep until we could actually move in. It was a studio, tucked inside this apartment complex, and honestly, there wasn't much to it. You opened the front door, and the bed and TV were immediately off to the left. If you walk straight ahead, there was this little doorway into the kitchen. And I mean little. Barely enough space to turn around in. The bathroom was just off to the right of that. That was the whole place. No hallway. No separate rooms, really. Just one open area, and then those 2 small doorways. But the thing I remember most about it was how exposed it felt. The unit was right in the middle of the complex, next to the dog park, so people were constantly walking by. You'd hear dogs barking, people talking, footsteps outside the window at all hours. It always felt like the outside world was pressed right up against the glass. Now, I've always been the early-to-bed type, and Jack was the total opposite. So around 10 that night, I passed out. Lights off. Jack was still awake beside me, scrolling on his phone in the dark, which was completely normal for him. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a hand grab my shoulder. Not a light tap, not a gentle shake. He yanked me awake. I opened my eyes, and Jack was sitting straight up in bed, completely still. His eyes were locked on the kitchen doorway, and I knew right away something was wrong. I whispered, "Jack, what is it?" He didn't look at me. He just said, really quietly, "I think someone's in here." At first, I thought he meant he'd heard something. A noise, maybe. A cabinet, a door, something like that. So I asked him, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I was watching a video on my phone, and I saw a man walk past the bed into the kitchen. That's when I started to wake up for real, because again, this apartment was tiny. If somebody came through the front door and walked into that kitchen, they would have passed right beside us, within arm's reach. There was no distance, no corner to hide behind, no long hallway, just the door, the bed, and the kitchen. I'm a pretty skeptical person, so my first thought was that maybe he'd seen a shadow, maybe something moved across his phone screen, or maybe his eyes played a trick on him. So I asked, "Are you sure it wasn't just something in the corner of your eye?" He finally looked at me, and the way he did, I still remember it. He said, "I was wide awake. I saw a man walk past me." And the thing is, Jack was not the kind of guy who scared easily. He was calm about almost everything. I had known him for years, and I had never seen him wake me up like that. I had never seen that look on his face. So when he said it that plainly, something in me went cold. I reached into the nightstand and grabbed the knife I kept there. I'm not trying to sound tough because I wasn't. My heart was pounding. But the place was so small that if someone was really standing in that kitchen, there wasn't much mystery left. I was about to find out. I got up and turned on the kitchen light. Nothing. The cabinets were closed. The floor was empty. Nobody was there. I checked the bathroom next. Nothing there either. I came back out and just stood in the middle of that tiny apartment, holding the knife, listening to the silence. There was no one. I told Jack I didn't find anybody. He didn't argue. He didn't panic. He just gave this small shrug and said he knew what he saw. And honestly, that bothered me more than if he had freaked out. He wasn't trying to convince me. He wasn't building it up. He just seemed completely certain, like the matter was already settled in his mind. So I started looking around more carefully. I checked the door, the windows, the corners, anywhere someone might have slipped in or out. I even started thinking about hidden openings, loose panels, weird crawl spaces, all those paranoid movie thoughts that show up when it's late and your brain decides to turn into a crime documentary. I didn't find anything. But I'll be honest, I was tired, shaken, and not exactly doing a professional search. So maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a way in or out that I just didn't see. We left the next morning, and I still think about it sometimes. Was there actually someone in that apartment? Did they somehow get out before I turned on the light? Did Jack see something real, or did his mind just fill in the dark with a shape that wasn't there? I still don't know. All I know is, whatever he saw, I never found it. And part of me is still glad I didn't. I want to tell you about a session I did with a man I'll call Amir. He was an adult man from the Dallas area, and during the healing journey, he went into a very deep theta state. At first, he moved back through childhood memories, then into older pain, older fear, older imprints, and then he went even further. He went to a place before he was born. What he found there was not what either of us expected. He said that before this life, he and his mother were together, but not in bodies, not standing in a room, not even as two separate people the way we think of separation here. He described it as if there was no distance between them, no wall, no edge, just awareness. He said, "It feels like there's no space between us. I'm not really a person yet. I'm more like a soft shape of consciousness." His mother was near him too, but not as the woman he would later know. She was more like another point of awareness beside him. Close, familiar, connected. Then he became aware of something that felt like a life plan. Not a written list exactly, but something like a knowing. He could sense the experiences waiting for him in the life ahead. Weakness, helplessness, confusion, pain, hard lessons. And he didn't want to go. He said very quietly, I don't think I want to go there. He could feel that it would be difficult, not just uncomfortable, difficult in a way that would shape him from the inside out. But then another understanding came in. He realized that this was part of how light learns to enter darkness, not by looking at pain from far away, not by studying it as an idea, but by living inside it long enough to understand what others feel. He said, "It feels like this experience is required." His higher self showed him that the purpose was not to fix everything. It was not to erase the pain before it happened. It was to understand. He said, "It's not about changing it. It's about understanding it." And that stayed with me, because you can observe suffering from the outside and still not know it. You can read about grief and still not know grief. You can talk about fear and still not know what fear does to the body. Some things can only be learned by entering the room yourself. Then he saw his mother's role more clearly. On a soul level, she had agreed to play a painful part in his life. Her role was harsh. Her presence would shape him through pressure, through difficulty, through emotional weight. And in one sense, it made him stronger. It prepared him for a world that would not always be gentle. But there was a cost. And that is important to say. Understanding a soul agreement does not excuse harm. It does not make cruelty beautiful. It does not mean a person should pretend they were not hurt. But it can sometimes change the way the wound is carried. In that space, Amir understood that some souls volunteer for dark roles, not because they are evil, not because pain is good, but because, from a much wider level of consciousness, certain lessons require contrast. Certain awakenings only happen when the soul touches what it came here to transform. When the session was ending, his higher self gave a very simple message. Love everyone. Let go. Learn to forgive. Not as a command, not as something forced, more like a door opening. The lesson from this journey is this: you may have chosen more of this life than your human mind can remember, even the painful parts. Not because you deserved suffering, not because you were being punished, but because before you came here, some part of you wanted to understand something that could only be learned through direct experience. And the people who hurt you may have been part of that learning too. That does not make what happened okay, but it may help you stop carrying it like a chain. So here is a simple practice you can try. Find a quiet place where no one will disturb you for about 20 minutes. Sit down or lie back, whatever feels natural. Close your eyes. Take 5 slow breaths. With every exhale, let your body become heavier. Let your arms soften. Let your legs sink. Let your head rest fully into whatever is supporting you. Now imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast, dark space. Not frightening darkness, not empty darkness, more like the darkness before the stars appeared. Warm, endless, alive. This is the space before incarnation, before the body, before the name, before the story began. Step into it. Let yourself float there. There is no ground beneath you, no direction, no need to do anything. Just awareness. Then ask silently, "Show me the moment before I came here." Do not force an answer. Let whatever comes come. Maybe you see light. Maybe you feel another presence near you. Maybe you sense a choice being made. Maybe you feel hesitation, as if some deep part of you remembers not wanting to come. That is okay. Just observe. If something appears, stay with it. Don't analyze it. Don't judge it. Don't try to make it logical. Be with it like you are watching a memory older than your body. When you feel ready, take 3 slow breaths and return. Open your eyes slowly. Then write down whatever came through, even if it makes no sense. Especially if it makes no sense. The logical mind will want to explain it away. Let it be strange for a while. Try this for 7 days in a row. The first time, you may see nothing. That is completely normal. Sometimes the door opens only after we stop pushing on it. By the 3rd or 4th day, something may begin to surface. A feeling, an image, a knowing, a quiet memory that does not seem to belong to this life. Trust what comes gently. You do not have to prove it. Just listen. I want to tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine back in 2015. He was from Mandi in Himachal Pradesh, and his name was Chetan. Now, if you know anything about Himachal, you know people call it Dev Bhumi, the land of deities. And in places where people believe the divine is close, they also believe the unseen is never too far away. Back then, Prashur Lake was not as crowded as it is now. It was mostly locals who went there, especially people from Mandi. One afternoon, Chetan and another friend of his decided to ride up there on a scooter. They reached the lake, visited the temple, took a few pictures, sat around for a while, and then started heading back around evening. By the time they were on the road back to Mandi, it had already grown dark. And that road, especially in those days, could feel completely cut off from the world. There were long stretches with no houses, no shops, no streetlights, nothing. Just the narrow road, the mountains, and thick deodar and pine trees standing on both sides. Even in daylight, some parts of that route felt strange. At night, it felt like the forest was listening. Then, at one of those isolated stretches, their scooter suddenly gave up. The petrol tank was empty. Chetan got angry at his friend because it was his scooter, and he asked him why he hadn't checked the fuel before they left. But there was no use arguing for long. They were stranded, surrounded by darkness, with no sign of any house nearby. So they decided to drag the scooter downhill and keep moving until they found someone who could help. After some time, they noticed a girl walking toward them from the opposite side of the road. That alone felt wrong. It was pitch dark. There were no houses anywhere nearby. No reason for anyone to be walking alone there, especially not a young girl. But as she came closer, both of them saw that she was very beautiful. She was dressed like a village girl, wearing traditional Himachali clothes, and for a moment, they were almost too stunned to react. But Chetan told me that something inside him immediately warned him not to speak to her. So he kept his head down and continued dragging the scooter. His friend did the same. They both pretended she wasn't there. Then the girl stopped near them and asked, very calmly, "Where are you going?" Neither of them answered. They just kept walking. After a few seconds, she spoke again. This time, her voice had a strange playfulness in it. She said, "Do you want to see a magic trick?" That was when Chetan's whole body went cold. Before either of them could say anything, the girl lifted one hand. Then, with the fingers of her other hand, she began pulling the fingers from her palm one by one, not bending them, not twisting them, removing them. She pulled them out like they were pieces of a toy, then placed them back again as if it was nothing. Chetan froze. Then his eyes dropped to her feet. They were turned backward. The moment he saw that, both he and his friends screamed. They grabbed the scooter and started dragging it as fast as they could, half running, half stumbling down the road, reciting the Hanuman Chalisa out loud with whatever breath they had left. After a little distance, Chetan looked back. The girl was gone. There was no sound of footsteps, no movement in the trees, no figure standing on the road. She had disappeared as if the darkness had swallowed her. They kept going until, after what felt like forever, they finally saw a house. They knocked on the door and told the man inside what had happened. The local resident listened, and instead of laughing, he scolded them. He told them they should never travel that road after dark. He said people had seen a Chudale there before, a witch. According to him, she had haunted that stretch for years, and several locals had encountered her around the same spot. He gave them some petrol, and somehow they managed to get back home safely late that night. But I still remember how Chetan looked when he told me this story. He wasn't trying to entertain anyone. His hands were shaking, and he had goosebumps while speaking. And the thing is, in our stories, a Chudale often appears as a beautiful woman to lure men toward her. That is why I believe Chetan was lucky. Not just lucky, actually. Brave. Because many people might have fainted right there on that lonely road. But he kept moving, kept praying, and got himself and his friend away from whatever had been waiting for them in the dark. You know, ever since I was old enough to understand the world, I never actually saw them with my own eyes. Not once. But my family did, or at least, they came close enough that the fear settled into our house like damp air. And even now, after all these years, whenever I think back to that old cinema, I still feel something cold move quietly through my chest. When I was little, my family lived in a small village near the Ochi River. People called the place Bayi Riverside. My mother raised silkworms at home, mostly to keep herself busy, while my father worked as a projectionist at the town cinema. He only came home once or twice a week. Most nights, he slept in the front building of the theater. Around 1989, the county town started building new apartment blocks. Back then, there was a policy that if you bought one apartment, 2 people in your family could change their rural registration into urban registration. To my parents, that sounded like a doorway opening for my younger brother and me. They wanted us to become city residents someday, to have a steadier future. So they gathered every bit of savings we had and rode their bicycles into town to pay the deposit. But when they arrived, the person handling the payment wasn't there. They had no choice but to ride all the way back home, planning to return the next day. By then, it was already late. The road from the county town to our village was about 20 kilometers. When they were almost home, my father said he was thirsty, so they stopped at my aunt's roadside house for water. The bicycle was left outside, and the money, all of it, was still hanging on the bicycle. They forgot. Only after they finished drinking did they remember. By then, the money was gone. For our family, that wasn't just money. It was years of saving, years of hope, years of my parents swallowing hardship without complaint. I still remember seeing my mother cry quietly during those days. She tried to hide it, but children notice the things adults think they can cover. The next year, I was about to enter 6th grade. My father wanted me to study at a better school, so he managed to transfer me to the town's central elementary school. Since it was too far from our village, I moved into the front building of the cinema and lived there with him. Not long after that, my father decided it made no sense for my mother, my brother, and my grandmother to stay back in the village. We needed income now. The cinema business was still good, so my parents planned to sell snacks inside the theater during screenings. Melon seeds, peanuts, sugarcane, little things like that. And just like that, our whole family moved into the cinema. That is where the real story begins. The cinema wasn't like cinemas today. It wasn't only for movies. Back then, a cinema could also be a meeting hall, an opera stage, a performance venue, even a place for public rallies. It was more like the town's giant wooden heart, beating with everyone's noise. The old people in town said that before the cinema was built, there had been a large assembly hall on that same land. It had mud brick walls and a straw roof. One day in the 1950s, after a meeting ended and everyone had left, a storm came down hard. Thunder rolled over the town, lightning struck, and the whole building collapsed. When people cleared the ruins, they found snakes. Not one or two, countless snakes. Dead snakes under the rubble, dead snakes beneath the foundation, layer after layer of them. The government sent people to haul them away by the cartload and bury them somewhere else. Later, the cinema was built right on that same foundation. It was the grandest building in town then. There was a front building, the main auditorium, and a rear stage building. The front and back sections were 2 stories tall, while the auditorium was 1 story but very high and hollow. The floors and stairs were made of wood, and whenever you walked, they creaked like they were answering you. At first, we lived in the front building. For the first few months, everything felt new. My grandmother, my mother, my brother, and I were still getting used to town life. But after you live in a place long enough, the stories begin finding you. People said strange things had happened in that cinema. One story was about a woman whose son had been sentenced during a public rally held there. She believed he had been wrongly accused. During the rally, she shouted again and again that her son was innocent, begging the authorities to reopen the case. No one listened. They dragged her out for disrupting the proceedings. After everyone left, she went alone to a room on the far right side of the rear stage building and hanged herself. Her body stayed there for days before anyone found her. I've thought about her many times. A person doesn't choose that kind of ending unless the pain inside them has nowhere else to go. Then there was another death. In the early 1980s, the cinema was packed almost every night. People didn't have televisions or DVDs then. Movies were a window to the outside world, and everyone wanted to look through it. But the town also had gangs. Young men with tattoos, groups with names like the Green Dragon Gang, the Renzi Gang, the Plum Blossom Gang. They were everywhere, and the cinema was where young men liked to show off. One night, a fight broke out between 2 groups. The front rows turned into chaos. People stood up, shouted, climbed onto chairs to watch. A young man sitting near the back wanted to see what was happening. He stood on his seat. Then he climbed higher, onto the backrest. But above him, one of those huge ceiling fans was spinning. Everyone was watching the fight, so nobody saw it happen clearly. They only noticed when he fell. The screams that followed were louder than the fighting. That young man had nothing to do with the gangs. He was just watching a movie. Gone. Just like that. After hearing those stories, I kept telling myself that both deaths had happened in the auditorium or the rear building. We lived in the front. Surely, if there really were things there, they wouldn't come to us. That was what I told myself. Then one evening, my aunt came to visit. There was a movie that night, so after dinner my mother went to prepare snacks, my father went to clear the theater, and my brother ran out to play. My aunt didn't know the layout of our rooms yet, so she quietly asked my grandmother, "Is elder brother still sleeping in that room?" My grandmother said, "No, he moved downstairs." I was confused and asked, "Moved from which room?" Nobody moved. My grandmother quickly said my aunt had just mixed things up, and then she gave my aunt a look, the kind adults give when they want someone to stop talking. But my aunt didn't notice. The kitchen light was dim, and she was terribly nearsighted. So she continued, "You haven't seen that thing again, right? Some things are better believed than ignored." My grandmother's face changed at once. She said, "No more, no more," and hurried me away to do homework. That moment frightened me more than all the rumors, because suddenly, the stories weren't just stories. They had entered our family. Now, some people might say this isn't frightening, because I never personally saw anything. But when you live inside a place everyone whispers about, fear doesn't need to appear in front of you. It sits beside your bed. It waits at the stairwell. It follows the sound of every wooden creak. Years later, I entered university, and after my family finally left the cinema, I rarely went back. But one period from our time there stayed with me more deeply than the rest, because it was the first time I truly felt that maybe, one day, I would meet them myself. In daylight, I was brave. Teenagers are like that. At night, I was afraid of everything, but when the sun came up, ghosts seemed impossible. I even dared to enter the room where my father had once seen something. I saw nothing. Instead, I found old film slides, colored promotional slides, handmade slides my father had carved, and old theater equipment. To me, they were treasures. I took things apart, examined them, played with them, ruined more than I should have. Around that time, I also heard another story, this one from Chen Zhenbao, who worked with my father. By the late 1980s, traveling song and dance troupes were common. Some were official, some only pretended to be. One troupe came from Hubei and claimed to be from Wuhan. Their lineup was larger than usual, so my father advertised heavily. The tickets were expensive, much more expensive than movie tickets, so plenty of people tried to sneak in. Usually my father and Chen Zhenbao checked tickets, while Yan Ding-an handled the projector, and a man nicknamed Old Mao sold tickets. But for performances like that, the troupe sent their own guards too. Strong men, people who clearly knew how to handle trouble. That night, trouble came anyway. A small leader from the Green Dragon gang arrived with more than 10 followers. None of them had tickets. They tried to force their way in. The troupe's guards tried to reason with them at first, but the gang leader refused to back down. The show was about to start. The police officers who were supposed to keep order had already slipped inside to watch. So the gang beat the guards and stormed into the theater. Afterward, everything seemed calm. The show ended. The troupe left town. A few days later, one of the gang members disappeared. At first, nobody connected it to the cinema. Back then, people disappeared for all kinds of ugly reasons. Then, for several nights, after my father and Chen Zhenbao cleared the theater and switched off the stage power, they noticed a terrible smell. At first, they thought someone nearby was cleaning a toilet pit, but the smell grew worse. One day, before the audience entered, they went to turn on the lights. Chen Zhenbao thought he saw someone moving on the right side of the second floor, as if someone had sneaked in without paying. They switched on all the lights and went upstairs. The smell was much stronger there. It wasn't sewage. They followed it slowly until they reached the room on the far right side of the second floor, the same room where that grieving mother had hanged herself. Then they heard movement inside. Both men froze. The whole floor was wood. Every tiny sound seemed too loud. In the end, neither of them dared open the door. They went downstairs, pale-faced, and found several acquaintances waiting outside. With more people, courage finally gathered itself. They all went back upstairs. Everyone agreed the smell came from that room. Still, nobody wanted to open it. At last, one brave man kicked the door in. Inside was a corpse, already badly decomposed. Some people fainted. Some vomited right there. But the most terrified people were my father and Chen Zhenbao, because Chen Zhenbao had seen someone moving, and they had heard sounds. Could a dead man have made those sounds? Later, the case was solved. The corpse was the gang leader who had caused trouble that night. The beaten troupe members had followed him after the show, captured him, tied him up, and dumped him in that room. They hadn't meant to kill him. They only wanted him to suffer for a few days. They had made him swallow something, maybe to weaken him or keep him unconscious, then left him there. They didn't know the history of that room. They thought he would wake up eventually, shout for help, and be found. Instead, he died. The autopsy said it wasn't poison. There were no clear injuries either. His death was simply strange. People said his eyes were wide open when they found him, and his mouth was stretched open, as if his last moment had been pure terror. After hearing that story, I slept with the lights on for several nights. My brother and I shared a tiny room. There was barely enough space for a bed, a large desk, and a television sitting on top of it. The gap between the bed and desk could only fit one stool, but with a bright bulb burning overhead, that cramped little room felt safe. Eventually, fear faded again. Life always does that. It keeps moving, even when your heart wants to stay frozen in one place. Back then, I kept thinking, thank goodness we lived in the front building. Thank goodness we weren't in the rear stage building. But life has a cruel way of listening. What you pray will stay away often comes closer, and what you fear most sometimes learns the path to your door. Okay, so this started about a year ago. The first time anything happened, I was just lying in bed, texting a couple of friends. You know that strange feeling you get when it seems like someone is watching you, and without even thinking, you look up? That's what happened. I looked toward the corner of my room, and I saw a man standing there. But he didn't look like a normal man. He looked burned, like his whole body had been damaged somehow. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I thought maybe I'd been staring at my phone too long, and my eyes were just turning a pile of clothes or shadows into a person. But then he moved. He started crouching down, twisting himself backward, almost like he was lowering into a bridge. And as he did it, he seemed to shrink. At first he looked tall, maybe around 6 feet, but then he looked smaller. Not tiny exactly, but closer to the size of a child. Then he rushed toward my bed. It happened so fast. I panicked and turned my phone screen toward him, using the light from it, and he was just gone. I really thought that was going to be the only time something like that happened. I wanted it to be the only time. But lately, I've been seeing other things. There's a girl I keep noticing, or at least I think it's a girl. Sometimes I hear her laughing when I'm completely alone. And then there's this shadowy man. I'm almost positive he wears a boater hat. I didn't even know what that kind of hat was called at first. I had to search for a while because I know absolutely nothing about hats. But when I finally found the right one, I felt this weird little relief. Like, okay, at least I know what I'm seeing. Tonight, I was alone again. I actually felt pretty calm because it had been about 3 weeks since I'd seen or heard anything. I was sitting there sketching, just trying to relax when I heard it. A girl crying. At first, I tried not to react. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was outside. Maybe it was some weird sound from the building. But then I realized it was coming from behind the couch. I kept trying to talk myself out of being scared. I kept thinking, no, don't make this into something. Don't freak yourself out. But the crying kept going. So I put my sketch pad down and stood up. The second I did, it stopped. For a moment I thought maybe that was the end of it. But I was already done. I wasn't going to be the person in a horror movie who stays to investigate. I started getting ready to leave. I kept my eyes on the side of the couch where the sound had come from, while I reached around with my hand, trying to find my keys. When I finally felt them, I glanced down for barely a second. And that's when I heard her laugh. It came from the couch. I snapped my head back so fast, and I saw this shadow moving along it. It reminded me of those scenes in movies where something invisible walks through a room, but you can still see the way it disturbs the air or casts a shape across the wall. That's what it looked like. I have an L-shaped couch, and I was sitting near one end. The other side of it is where all of this was happening. The shadow moved along the back of the couch toward the corner, and then it lowered, almost like it was ducking down behind the armrest. And I just thought, absolutely not. I wasn't going to wait for whatever it was to come out fully, especially not in daylight. I'm scared enough when things happen in the dark, but seeing something like that when the room is bright? No, I couldn't do it. I ran straight to the door and didn't look back. I stayed outside for about an hour and a half before I finally got someone to go in with me, and checked the place. So yeah, I honestly don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm losing it, or if there's something in my home, or if there's some explanation I'm just not seeing. I just really need someone to tell me what they think, because I don't know what to do anymore. So last night, my girlfriend Brianna and I decided to finally test out some of our new ghost hunting equipment. We've been wanting to check out Fort Lowell Park in Tucson for a while. It has a lot of history packed into it. It was once a U.S. Army post during the Apache Wars, and before that, the area had ties to Hohokam people going back more than 1,000 years. So walking into that place, you already feel like the ground has been carrying stories for a very long time. We brought our EMF readers and a spirit box with us. I had heard plenty of stories about Fort Lowell before. People talk about seeing old soldier figures, hearing horses, even catching the sounds of equipment or movement near the old hospital ruins. And honestly, with all the history there, I was expecting the atmosphere to feel heavier than it did. We got there a little after 8 p.m. The park was still open, and there were people around. A few visitors, some dog walkers, that kind of thing. So it didn't feel quite as eerie as I was hoping. We walked through most of the park, taking our time. Every now and then, the EMF reader would spike fast from green to red, but it would vanish almost immediately. Just a quick little flash, like something tapping the glass and then disappearing. At one point, we were standing out in the middle of what's now a baseball field, and the reader moved up to yellow. That gave us a little hope, because we were away from obvious electrical sources. But we couldn't get much more than that. We tried the spirit box, but it was mostly useless. The radio stations kept bleeding through so badly that instead of white noise, it just became frustrating. We stood there listening, hoping for something clear, but nothing really came through. After a while, we decided to leave Fort Lowell and head downtown. We ended up near 6th Avenue and came across some older, abandoned buildings. One of them was connected to the St. Augustine Cathedral area, an old religious education building. The cathedral itself is a major historic landmark in Tucson, so the whole area already had this quiet, watchful feeling to it. We walked around taking pictures and looking for any safe way to see more of the building. We stayed outside, moving slowly, trying to avoid power boxes or anything that could mess with the EMF readings. Even then, the reader started jumping from green to yellow to red. The real moment happened near the steps. We were standing at the foot of the building, asking simple questions, and the EMF reader went to yellow. At first, I thought it was just another random spike, but then it started reacting in a way that felt timed with what we were asking. The spirit box still wasn't giving us anything useful, but the EMF reader kept moving, almost like something was using the colors to answer. We asked whatever was there to show us it was present. That's when the reader jumped to red. Right after that, the temperature dropped. Not dramatically like in a movie, but enough that both of us noticed. Then we heard these faint sounds bouncing off the wall nearby. I couldn't make out words. It was more like muffled movement or voices just out of reach. We kept talking. The EMF colors kept rising and falling. It felt strangely interactive, almost like whatever was there didn't mind us being around. At one point, it seemed like it didn't want us to leave. We stayed there for over an hour and a half. Eventually, the responses got weaker. The reader stopped reacting as much, so we said goodbye respectfully and left. Now, after some of my past experiences, I really wanted this one to feel authentic. Brianna was excited, and seeing her reaction honestly made me feel better about what had happened. But I still had doubts. I wanted something stronger, something I couldn't explain away. And that's where the night got strange. We went home and went to bed. Sometime during the night, I woke up to the sound of something hitting the kitchen counter. like a small object being dropped or knocked over. Our cat was asleep at the foot of the bed, so I knew it wasn't her. I tried to ignore it and eventually fell back asleep. Later, Brianna got up to use the bathroom. I remember being aware of it, but I didn't fully wake up. Then, sometime after that, I heard footsteps near our bed. Clear footsteps. Not a creak, not the house settling, not the cat. It sounded like someone walking right beside us. The sound was so distinct that this cold feeling went through my whole body. I looked over, and Brianna was asleep. That scared me more than I want to admit. I said a quick prayer under my breath and tried to calm myself down enough to sleep again. Later in the night, the room felt unusually cold. That stood out to me because I usually run warm. I'm not the kind of person who gets cold easily, and I almost never need a jacket. But this was different. It felt uncomfortable, like the air had shifted. When I woke up the next morning, I felt awful. Not sick exactly, more like I had slept with one eye open all night. Like my body had been resting, but my mind had been on guard the whole time. I told Brianna what happened, but she hadn't experienced anything like that. About an hour later, I suddenly felt like I needed a nap, which is not normal for me. When I fell asleep, I had a dream, and in that dream, a name came through very clearly. Ronnie. In the dream, Brianna was talking to him. I saw him in a picture, but I wasn't actually speaking to him face to face. It was more like I was being shown who he was. When I woke up, I asked Brianna if she knew anyone named Ronnie or Ronald. She said no. So now I keep turning it over in my head. Maybe Ronnie was connected to whoever we were communicating with at that abandoned religious education building. Maybe something followed us home. Maybe my brain stitched the whole thing together because I wanted an answer so badly. I don't know. That's the part I'm stuck on. Was this something real trying to make itself known? Or was my mind just running wild after a long night of searching in dark places? So, this happened in the old art building on campus, back when it was still standing. And when I say old, I mean old. The place was almost a century old and had originally been built as a gymnasium before someone, at some point, decided to chop it up into studios, classrooms, storage rooms, and whatever else they could squeeze into the bones of it. The layout made no sense. To get from one side of the building to the side with the working bathroom, you either had to go up a flight of stairs, cross through the second floor, then come back down another set of stairs, or you had to go outside and walk around the building. Neither option felt especially dignified at midnight. The whole place creaked and groaned constantly. Studio doors scraped across concrete. Some doors were held shut with chains and padlocks. The metal stairs had this one uneven step where metal turned into concrete, and I swear everyone tripped on it at least once. The lockers were these old, rattling metal things that sounded angry every time someone lifted the latch. People joked that the building was haunted, but not in a serious way. There were no big legends attached to it. The dorm across the street had the usual girl in white ghost story, but the art building was mostly known for leaks, dust, bad lighting, and probably several safety violations wearing a trench coat. I never felt scared in there. Not because of ghosts anyway. Creepy people and falling ceiling tiles, sure. Ghosts, no. A few years later, the university tore the building down after a donor paid for a new one. So if anything was haunting that old art building, it is now haunting a patch of weeds, dandelions, and mosquitoes. But this happened before all that. It was finals week, and I was working late in the ceramics studio. That was the only time I ever stayed that late, because finals turn everybody into a weird little raccoon with deadlines. I had been there all day. Earlier, the studio had been full of classes, other students, and people pretending they were not deeply behind on their projects. But by close to midnight, I was alone. I had my headphones half off my ears because I wanted to hear if someone came through doing light checks. That was sort of the unspoken rule. If you thought you were the last person in a space, you turned the lights off to save electricity. The switches were down a little hallway by the lockers, out of sight from the main room, and the tables made it annoying to get to them quickly. So I wanted to be able to yell, "Hey, I'm still in here," before getting plunged into darkness like some tragic clay goblin. The important thing is, I knew I was alone in that room. After maybe an hour, I had to use the bathroom. So I made the little pilgrimage to the newer addition, where the functional bathroom was. On the way, I passed the gallery and the sculpture studio. Their doors were locked and chained shut for the night. I went up the stairs, past the second-floor classrooms, down the annex stairs, used the bathroom, and came back the same ridiculous way. That trip gave me a good sense of the building. There were still a few people working in other rooms, based on the lights and the occasional noises. I was not alone in the building, which was honestly comforting. You needed an ID card to get in, but people are crafty, and I preferred the idea of a few witnesses nearby. When I got back to the ceramic studio, I worked alone for maybe another half hour. Then I heard footsteps. Not vague old building noises, not creaks, not pipes. Footsteps. They were that very specific dusty concrete sound, like soft-soled shoes scuffing across the floor. 4 steps maybe, slow enough to register, close enough to sound like someone had walked along one side of the room. My first thought was not ghost. My first thought was, who came in? So I called out. Nothing. I leaned back to look toward the locker hallway. No one. Then I checked the room. There was a senior area partly blocked off by metal shelving, so I walked around and looked there. I checked the glaze room, the tiny repurposed office closets, the odd little senior lounge tucked under the old vaulted ceiling space, and the hallway leading back toward the lobby. No one. I stepped into the lobby to see if someone was still making rounds. Still no one. No footsteps on the stairs. The gallery and sculpture studio were still chained shut, and the sculpture studio had one of those doors that screamed whenever it opened, so if someone had gone in or out, I would have heard it. I figured maybe whoever it was had quiet shoes and slipped upstairs, or maybe they left through the main entrance, even though that would have been weird because the parking lot was behind the building. So I looked toward the office area, lights off. Then I checked upstairs. No one. At that point, I was confused more than scared. It still felt like a person problem, not a ghost problem. But not knowing who else might be moving around near you in an almost empty building does put a little ice cube in the bloodstream. I went back to work, but I switched my music to play quietly from my phone speaker instead of putting my headphones back on. I wanted to hear what was happening around me. Maybe 30 minutes later, I heard one of the locker latches move. It rattled, scraped, and clicked. Exactly like someone had lifted the latch to open it. I went straight into the locker hallway, immediately. No one was there. All the lockers were closed. That hallway was one way in and one way out, so there was nowhere for anyone to slip past me. I looked into the lobby and up the stairs. Nothing. I went upstairs just in case, and the few people still in the building were buried in their projects. The annex door had not beeped open. Nobody was walking away. Nobody looked like they had just sprinted downstairs, lifted a locker latch, and vanished into the academic fog. There was just no sign of anyone having been near the first floor, let alone inside the ceramics studio. And the sounds were so specific. That is what still bothers me. The footsteps were not random settling. They were sequential. Scuff, 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 scuff. Moving in one direction. Not a scrape from something dragging in place. Not a pipe knocking. Not a door shifting. They sounded like shoes. And the locker latch was even worse, because I knew that sound. I had heard those lockers all the time. It was not the sound of metal falling or settling. It was the sound of someone lifting the handle, engaging the mechanism, and getting ready to open the door. Nothing before it, nothing after it. Just that deliberate little clank in the hallway. I was not terrified. I am still not terrified when I think about it. But it is the one experience I have never been able to explain. I have been in old houses that creak and tap and slam doors. I can usually talk myself through it. Wind, HVAC, trees, animals, pipes, a house shifting in the temperature. There is almost always some boring, practical explanation waiting around with a clipboard. But this? I do not know. Maybe it was some kind of echo from another part of the building. Maybe it was the building settling in a way that perfectly imitated a person walking and then opening a locker. Maybe some impossibly quiet person was playing the world's least impressive prank. Or maybe, just maybe, I experienced a haunting. A very boring haunting, honestly. No dramatic apparition, no whispered name, no face in the window. Just footsteps, a locker latch, and the feeling that someone had come into the room, looked around, and left. That is my only real ghost story, and as strange as it sounds, I think something was there. Back when I was in middle school, I studied at this old, all-girls convent school, the kind of place where every hallway felt like it had rules baked into the walls. It was an English missionary school, very strict, very traditional, and honestly, a little intimidating even on normal days. The building itself was ancient, properly old. It had been around for more than 150 years, originally started by French nuns as an orphanage before it became this well-known school. And because it was that old, there were stories everywhere. There was a chapel inside the campus with old tombstones near it. Some of the nuns from way back were supposedly buried there. People whispered about deaths, strange incidents, and things that had happened long before any of us were born. Nobody ever confirmed anything, of course. Adults never did. But students always knew. The creepiest place on campus was this huge 4-story building we called the junior block, even though nobody really used it anymore. Years before, it had apparently been a hostel for girls. Then, sometime around the late 1960s, it was shut down permanently after a few awful incidents. After that, the school just left the whole building there. That was the strange part. Our school kept building new classrooms and expanding whenever they needed space, but that enormous building stayed empty. The rooms were massive, with high ceilings and dusty windows. Some doors were sealed shut. Others had old latches or rusted locks. We were told not to go inside unless a teacher allowed it, which, of course, made us even more curious. Then came our annual school concert. I was in the music group, and we needed a quiet room to practice. Every normal room was already taken by dancers, singers, or other performers, so our teacher finally gave us permission to use one room in that old building. We were excited, but there were rules. We could only use the assigned room. We had to tell a teacher before and after practice. We were not allowed to wander, and we had to return to class at least 15 minutes before dismissal. No excuses. There were 7 of us in the group, including me. For the first few days, we behaved. Mostly. But after a while, curiosity started tugging at us. Some days, after practice, we would sneak into the corridors and peek around. The whole place felt abandoned in a way that was hard to explain. Not just empty. Watched. One afternoon, we found a latched room on the 4th floor. It was not locked. That was enough for us. We opened it and went inside, expecting another dusty old classroom. But at the far end of the room, we saw something none of us expected. A staircase. A whole narrow staircase hidden inside the room, leading down into darkness. We knew we should have left right then. We really did. But 3 of us decided to go down, including me. 2 girls stayed near the top, and the others went back to the practice room to cover for us in case a teacher came looking. We only had 1 phone for light. The staircase was so narrow that 2 people could barely walk side by side. I remember the air getting colder as we went down. At first, we thought the stairs would lead to the ground floor, but they didn't. After a few minutes, the stairs stopped at this strange half-level. There was almost nothing there. Just an old wooden chair, broken plaster, and bits of debris scattered near the walls. The smell was horrible. Damp, rotten, sour, like something had been trapped there for years. We could barely stand it. My friend Mira kept saying she saw something move along the wall. A shadow, she said. Not a person exactly, but something passing by where nothing should have been. We tried to laugh it off, but none of us were laughing properly. Then, on the way back up, it happened. One of my friends suddenly fell. And I don't mean she slipped. I don't mean she lost her balance in the usual way. She said something pushed her from the front. She went tumbling down the stairs so violently that for a second, none of us could even move. Then she screamed. It was the kind of scream that empties your chest. We rushed back down to get her, and that was when we saw the walls properly in the phone light. There were dark stains along the stairwell. They looked like old, dried blood. My friend was shaking so badly she could barely speak. Then she fainted. After that, everything became chaos. Teachers were called. We were scolded, questioned, and removed from the annual concert completely. But honestly, none of us cared anymore. We didn't want to go back into that building. Not for practice. Not for anything. After summer break, we noticed the door to that room had been sealed and painted over, as if it had never opened in the first place. I don't know what was in that stairwell. I don't know what pushed my friend. I don't know why that room existed or why the school pretended the whole building was just an inconvenience. But all 7 of us remembered it. And even now, years later, the part that stays with me most is this: someone, or something, was down there with us. I remember the door being open. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the darkness, not the cold, not even the girl sitting inside with that calm little smile on her face. It was the door. It was wide open, pushed back against the wall like someone had left in a hurry and never found the courage to return. And inside that house, beneath the floorboards, Father Corin was still alive. That's the part that has stayed with me. Not that something had hurt him, not even that it had broken him. It was that whatever was inside that girl had broken him, then kept him breathing, kept him sitting down there in the dark with his eyes open and his prayers emptied out. Because a dead priest is only a body, but a living priest who can no longer believe? That is a warning. And I knew, the moment I stepped inside, that the warning was meant for me. My name is Father Alden. Before that night, I had performed 4 exorcisms. I had never failed. I traveled nearly 2 days through the October cold to reach that farmhouse, and by the time the road gave up, I had to walk the last stretch alone. The fields around the place were bare from harvest, and the wind moved over them like it had been waiting for someone specific. When I reached the house, there was 1 lamp burning in the front room. And there she was, 14 years old, dark hair, a small scar near her brow, just like the bishop's letter had described. She sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap, and she smiled at me. Before I could speak, before I could set my bag down, she looked straight at me and said, "He went below to find something I hid." Would you like to see what he found? I should have turned around right then. I know that now. But I didn't. I went in. I sat across from her. I opened my book, and I asked her where Father Corin was. She glanced toward the back of the room, toward the cellar door, and then she looked back at me. Praying, she said. He has been praying for 6 days. The words are still there. It's only the faith behind them that's gone. She said it so gently. That was what made it worse. No shouting, no twisted voice, no rage. Just a child's mouth carrying something ancient and patient. I began the rite. She let me. That, more than anything, frightened me. In the other exorcisms, there had always been resistance, screaming, mockery, violence. Some sign that the prayers had struck something. But this girl simply sat there. She watched me the way someone watches rain hit a window. The words filled the room and went nowhere. The lamp did not flicker. The walls did not tremble. She did not move. And beneath my own voice, beneath the Latin and the training and all the certainty I had built my life upon, one quiet question began to rise. Why isn't it afraid? I read for an hour. Then she said, almost kindly, "He's still down there. You can check on him if you like." I kept reading. She tilted her head a little. When he first came, he asked what I wanted. I told him the truth. I always tell the truth. It's the only thing I have that men like you are afraid of. I tried not to hear that. But some sentences don't pass through you. They lodge. After the second hour, I stopped. Not because I was tired, not because my voice had failed. I stopped because the silence between the prayers had become louder than the prayers themselves. So I stood, took the lamp, and went to the cellar. The handle was iron, cold enough to sting. When I pulled the door open, a smell rose from below. It wasn't rot. It wasn't damp. It was something older than both, something the body understands before the mind can name it. I went down. Father Corin was sitting against the far wall with his knees drawn up. His hands were open beside him, as though he had been holding something precious for a long time and had finally let it fall. He was alive. His eyes were fixed on a water barrel in the corner. I said his name. Slowly, he looked at me. "Don't look in the water," he whispered. His voice was almost gone. "It shows you what you are, not what you pretend to be, not the story you tell yourself, what you are underneath all of it." He swallowed, and his eyes drifted back toward the barrel as if it were pulling him. "I looked," he said. "Then I tried to pray. The words were there, Alden. Every word. But the thing that made them more than words." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. I understood. I went back upstairs and closed the cellar door. The girl was still waiting at the table. I sat down again. I found my place in the book. My thumb rested in the worn crease of the page, where it had rested so many times before. Then she whispered, "The barrel is behind you now." I said nothing. "You could look," she said. "You could know. Isn't not knowing worse?" I began to read again. My voice was steady. My hands did not shake. But something inside me had shifted. Not broken. Not yet. Just shifted. Like ice underfoot, beginning to remember it was water. She smiled. "Father Corin lasted 8 days before he looked," she said. "You may last longer. I think you will." Then she leaned forward, just a little. "But strength is only a longer road to the same door." I kept reading deep into the night. She waited. She had the cellar. She had the barrel. She had Father Corin breathing in the dark beneath us. And now she had planted a question in me. That was her real weapon. Not claws, Not screams, not blasphemy. A question. A small, patient thing with roots. And I knew, even as I prayed, that once a question like that finds soil, it does not stop growing. Not in darkness, not in silence, not even inside a man who believed himself fortified. You know, for as long as I can remember, strange things have followed me from place to place. I'm 37 now, and ever since I was a kid, no matter where I've lived, there's always been some kind of paranormal activity around me. My parents split up when I was young, and after that, we moved a lot. Every couple of years it seemed like we were packing up again. So I grew up in more houses than most people ever do, and somehow, that eerie feeling always came with me. Even after I moved to a different state about 10 years ago, the experiences never really stopped. It's not constant. It's not like every day is haunted or anything like that. But every so often, I'll hear voices when no one's there. I'll catch odd noises in the next room, or see someone out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing. Sometimes it's shadowy figures, just black shapes moving where they shouldn't be. I've seen objects shift on their own in plain sight. I've felt something brush against me when nobody was near. And more than once, I've had that heavy feeling of being watched, like I'm not alone even when I know I should be. There have even been unexplained bruises and scratches that I couldn't account for. One of the earliest things I remember happened at my grandma's house. My youngest uncle, Darren, is only about 8 years older than me, so growing up, we were more like cousins or siblings than anything else. We spent a lot of time at grandma's, and that old house had history. I was told it had been built sometime in the 1940s, and over the years, different people had added rooms onto it, so it had this pieced-together feel, like it had grown in strange directions. My uncle's room had this closet with old wooden sliding doors, and for some reason, whenever those doors were left open, I could not stay in that room. I can't explain it in a logical way. I just felt it. The second I saw that closet open, I'd get this deep, uneasy feeling in my stomach, like something was wrong in there, like something bad might step out if I stayed too long. It only happened in that room, and only when those doors were open. Another time, when I was old enough to stay home by myself, we were living way out in the country. It was quiet out there, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel bigger. One afternoon, my mom had gone into town to pick up groceries, and I was stretched out on the couch taking a nap. I woke up suddenly to the sound of voices, like people were talking nearby, and I could hear dishes rattling in the drainer in the kitchen. Not crashing, just shaking enough to make noise. I remember lying there, half awake, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but I knew what I heard. Then there's the experience that still gets under my skin when I think about it. By then, I was an adult, and after my grandma had a series of mini strokes, I moved in with her for a while to help take care of her. One day, it was just the two of us in the house, and I wasn't feeling well, so I went to my room to lie down. I was turned toward the wall, just resting, and then I heard what sounded exactly like the front door opening and closing, like someone had come inside. A second later, I heard footsteps moving down the hallway. I always kept my bedroom door slightly cracked in case Grandma needed me, so I was listening, waiting to hear her call out. But the house had gone completely still. Then I heard my bedroom door slowly open a little more. It paused. Then it shut. And just a couple of seconds later, right beside my ear, like someone was leaning over me, I heard a loud voice yell, "Hey!" That's the part that stays with me. Not just the fear, but how real it always feels in the moment. I still don't really know why I've had these experiences my whole life. I've asked myself that more times than I can count. Most of the time, it doesn't truly bother me. It surprises me more than anything. It startles me, yes, but it's also become this strange thread running through my life, something I can't ignore because it keeps happening. I've always been drawn to the paranormal, maybe because of everything I've experienced. I'm genuinely interested in that world, in the questions around it, in the things we can't explain. But when I tell some people what I've seen or heard, they look at me like I've lost my mind. And honestly, maybe I've gotten used to that too. But when you've lived it, when you've heard something breathe close to you in an empty room, or felt a presence you can't explain, you know how hard it is to just brush it off. I was 5 when my parents split up. Most of the time I stayed with my dad because getting to my mom's place meant a long drive, almost 2 hours each way, so I usually only saw her every other weekend. Around that same time, my grandmother was getting very sick. Everyone around me knew she didn't have much time left, but I was only a little kid, so I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew I loved her deeply. My dad and I were never especially close. He mostly kept me occupied by giving me one of those tiny old Android phones, and I spent a lot of time on it because, honestly, he didn't do much with me. One night, I remember crying and begging to go to my mom's house. I was screaming, completely upset, and eventually my dad had enough. He packed a bag, put me in the car, and started driving. What he didn't tell me was that my grandmother had died that same night. My mom wanted him to tell me. I know that now. While we were driving down the highway, they were on the phone arguing, both of them yelling. It got so heated that my dad pulled over to the side of the road because he didn't want to crash. He told me to stay in the car and said he'd be back in a minute. Then he got out and walked off into the dark. I remember just sitting there alone. It was around midnight and I could barely see anything. Across the highway there were distant lights, and on the other side of the car there were woods. I was crying hard, tugging at the door handle, the way any 5-year-old would be in that moment. And then I heard voices. Low, hushed voices. I looked up toward the trees, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing at the edge of the woods. A man, maybe, but impossibly tall. Not just tall in a normal way. I mean at least 7 feet, maybe more. I didn't feel panic exactly. I didn't feel calm either. I just froze and stared. Its legs seemed endless, and I couldn't make out a real face. Where its face should have been, there was only this blackness. Just a void. No features, no eyes, nothing. I don't know how long I looked at it. Then I heard the car door open. My dad got back in. I looked away for 1 second, and when I looked back, it was gone. Years later, I got really into horror stories, creepy internet stuff, all of that. Getting a phone so young meant I found things way too early. And once you know where to look, the internet will show you anything. But this didn't feel like imagination. For as long as I can remember, I've had this feeling that I'm never really alone. I've always felt drawn to the woods, too. When I was younger, I'd go there constantly, sometimes several times a day, and I'd stay out ridiculously late, sometimes until 1, 2, even 3 in the morning. And every now and then, just at the edge of my vision, I'd catch it again. That same thing. I tried telling friends, but no one took me seriously. Since I already liked horror, they just assumed I was making it up or freaking myself out. I stopped blaming them after a while. I get how it sounds. A lot of the homes I grew up in had dark histories too. Places where people had died. Places where terrible things had happened. So I got used to that heavy feeling in certain rooms, that sense that something might be lingering. But even then, it always came back to this one figure. It's hard to describe in a way that feels believable. It's so tall I have to tilt my head back just to imagine where its face should be. And still, I never actually see one. No matter the angle, no matter the distance, it's always just black. Empty blackness. So I gave up trying to explain it. It's never hurt me. That's the strange part. It doesn't attack. It doesn't chase. It just stands there, watching. And the older I get, the more often I see it, the closer it seems to be. I'm almost 19 now, and I still don't know what to make of it. I'm not exactly scared, but I'm not unaffected either. It's more complicated than that. It feels like living with a question that has been standing just outside my life for years, waiting for me to understand it. I still think about that first night a lot, the night my grandmother died. That was when it started. And sometimes I catch myself wondering something I don't even want to say out loud. That thing, it couldn't be her, right? I drew it once after I first saw it. I thought maybe if I put it on paper, someone would finally understand. But people just laughed. So now I'm saying it here, as plainly as I can. Has anyone else ever seen something like this? Has anyone else lived with something they can't explain? Something that never leaves, just waits? Because I still don't know what it is. And after all these years, I still haven't stopped looking. This happened around 16 years ago, when I was about 13. I was out riding my bike, distracted, and I turned the wrong way without really checking the street. I didn't notice the truck coming from the other side until it was too late, and it hit me head on. What happened in the instant after that is the part that has stayed with me all these years. Time didn't exactly slow down. It was more like my mind suddenly became intensely clear, like it was working at full speed to make one decision as fast as possible. Right at the moment of impact, I became aware of something that felt like a voice, though voice is not quite the right word. There wasn't any sound. It was more like a thought was placed gently into my mind, almost like a suggestion. What came to me was, "Go soft." And strangely, I understood exactly what that meant. I didn't picture anything stiff or rigid. What came to mind was something loose and limp, almost like a cloth doll. The meaning felt immediate. Don't fight this. Don't tense up. Don't resist what's happening. Just let your body give way. What still amazes me is that it felt like a choice. I remember thinking very clearly, "All right, I'll do that." And I did. The next thing I remember is being thrown through the air. Every instinct in me should have been screaming to brace myself, to protect my head, to tighten up. But I didn't. I stayed completely loose. I let my body go slack and free, and when I hit the pavement, I kept rolling with the force instead of fighting it. I didn't tense a muscle, not once. Even now, I don't think I could deliberately do that again. It felt peaceful in the strangest possible way. Not pleasant exactly, but calm. There was something almost still about it, even in the middle of all that violence. I've never really found the right words for that feeling. When I finally stopped moving, I sat up. The worst pain at first was in my right arm because the skin had been scraped badly by the road. I tried to stand, but then I saw my left leg bent at an angle that made it instantly obvious something was very wrong. That was where the truck had struck me directly, and both bones in my lower leg were broken. After that, everything moved fast. The ambulance took me to the nearest hospital, and they ran all kinds of tests because the accident had looked so severe. I'd been thrown several meters through the air and then rolled even farther across the asphalt. Given that, the doctors expected much more serious internal damage. But there wasn't any. No head trauma, no spinal injury, no hidden damage beyond the road rash and the shattered leg. My parents still talk about how stunned the doctors were. The bones in my leg were badly damaged, Not just broken, but splintered badly enough that they had to use metal rods to stabilize everything instead of relying on a normal cast. Even so, about 2.5 months later, I was almost fully recovered. The only lasting reminders were the scars on my leg where the rods had been. For a long time, I didn't think too deeply about that moment, about that silent suggestion to go soft. I always told myself it was probably just survival instinct expressing itself in an unusual way. But years later, when I got into martial arts, I started hearing ideas that felt deeply familiar. Things like rolling with impact, absorbing force through relaxation, not meeting power with stiffness. Different systems use different words, but the principle is similar. Sometimes the body takes less damage when you stop trying to resist every bit of force and let it move through you instead. Which is why I still can't fully explain what happened that day. Maybe it was just instinct, but instinct acting in a way I'd never known was possible. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I still don't know. I just know that in the worst moment of my life, something inside me told me exactly how to survive. And for some reason, I listened. This happened about 9 years ago, back when I was still living at my parents' house. I was staying in a basement bedroom, and there were several nights when I had a hard time falling asleep because I kept hearing, "in my room." I could never make out the words, but I could tell it sounded like a young girl's voice. It scared me more than I wanted to admit. After a while, I started asking my sister Lena to sleep in my room with me some nights. I told her I'd been hearing things, but I kept the details to myself. I didn't mention the whispering or that it sounded like a little girl. I didn't want to frighten her, so I just said I was feeling uneasy about sleeping alone downstairs. Later that year, I left for college, and Lena ended up taking over that room. When I came home on break, she said something to me that stopped me cold. She looked at me and said, "I hear a little girl whispering sometimes. Was that the voice you heard too?" I hadn't told her that part, not once. A few months after that, she hosted a youth group gathering at our parents' house. There was one boy in the group who had apparently told people he believed something dark had been following him around. I don't know what everyone thought about that, but that was his story. After the gathering, he pulled Lena aside and asked her, "Why are there 2 little girls playing in your backyard?" He wanted to know if she knew anything about them. That summer, Lena and I were sharing the room again. One night, we were both lying in bed, each scrolling on our phones, when the whole room lit up for a split second. It looked exactly like a camera flash from the far side of the room, near the bedroom door. We both ignored it in the moment. I think each of us was hoping the other had somehow caused it by accident, and neither of us wanted to say out loud what we were both thinking. The next morning, we finally talked about it. The flash had come from high up near the ceiling by the door, but the door had been shut. There weren't any windows there, no outlets, nothing that could have explained it. The blinds on the other side of the room were closed, and it definitely wasn't headlights from outside. We'd seen car lights spill into that room before, and this was nothing like that. This was sharp, sudden, and bright, like a camera going off right in front of us. A few nights later, we brought it up again before bed. Then, while we were both awake on our phones, it happened a second time. The same flash, the same area of the room. Neither of us said a word. We just grabbed onto each other, pulled the blankets over our heads, and called our dad to come downstairs. He checked everything, but there was no explanation. After that, we finally told our parents the whole story, everything that had been going on. My mom asked a priest to come bless the house. On his way over, he told her he had a strong feeling that something was trying to keep him from coming that day. Hearing that only made everything feel more real. One detail that always stood out to us was that this bedroom had been part of a basement extension that had been dug out a few years earlier. What makes that part especially unsettling is that she had no idea about any of our experiences when it happened. She had never heard our stories, and we had never heard hers until much later. I need to tell you something that happened a few years ago, and even now, it still unsettles me in a way I can't fully explain. I was living near the Jacksonville area at the time, in a small trailer with a pretty simple layout. The living room and kitchen were one open space, and a narrow hallway led back to the bedrooms and bathroom. My younger sister's room was at the very end. One afternoon, I got home from school, dropped onto the couch, and was just starting to relax when I heard this awful sound. It was this slow, uneven breathing, wet and ragged, like something struggling to stay alive. At first, I honestly thought maybe some animal had gotten hurt outside, so I stood up to check the window, and that's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, standing near my sister's doorway, was this thing about the size of a large wolf. Its head was turned just enough that I couldn't make out its face, which somehow made it worse. Its limbs looked wrong, bent at angles that didn't seem possible, like its joints were slipping out of place every time it shifted its weight. And its body, I still hate thinking about it. It looked raw, almost skinless, with slick yellowish patches across it, and I could see the muscles underneath twitching and pulling in different directions. It was making this chewing motion over and over, like it had something in its mouth. I froze. I had this sick feeling that it knew I was there, that it knew I was looking at it. I didn't go closer. I left the trailer and stayed away until more of my family got home. When we all went back inside later, there was nothing there. No tracks, no mess, no sign that anything had been in the house at all. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it, but after that, the whole place changed. Over the next several days, little things started happening. Objects would fall or get knocked over for no clear reason. We'd hear noises in empty rooms. Our dogs would suddenly start growling or barking at corners, windows, or the hallway, like they were seeing something none of us could see. Most of it was easy to brush off one piece at a time, but together it felt wrong. Then one night, about a week later, my sister started crying from her room. We ran in, and she was terrified. She said something under her bed had grabbed at her feet and started biting them. She kept saying it was big, not a rat or anything small. We tore the room apart looking. Under the bed, in the closet, behind furniture, everywhere. Nothing. The week after that, things got worse for me personally. At night, I started feeling watched, especially from my bedroom window. Then came the tapping. Soft at first, then whispering, or at least something that sounded close enough to whispering that it made my skin crawl. I would lie there completely still, trying not to react, hoping whatever it was would move on. One night, I heard footsteps outside, right next to my room, moving slowly along the side of the trailer toward the back. Then I heard this scraping sound, like a fingernail or claw dragging across the outside wall. I got up and started toward my parents' room to wake my dad and have him grab his shotgun. Before I could get there, 3 heavy bangs slammed against the front door. Not knocks, bangs. Loud enough that I really thought the door might split open. My dad checked outside with the shotgun, but there was nothing there. When I went back to my room, I looked toward the window, and there it was again. Then, sometime the following week, I woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like people screaming. It felt completely real, except somehow it was only inside my head. That's the only way I know how to explain it. I was exhausted and confused, and eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke with this sharp pain in my foot. When I pulled the blanket back, I found bite marks. They were narrower than a person's bite, but the pattern was disturbingly similar. The skin around them was red and bruised, like something had clamped down hard. I still don't know what I saw. I've looked into animals, folklore, regional stories, all of it. I changed details over the years in my own mind, trying to make it seem less real, less impossible, but nothing ever fit. And honestly, what stays with me most isn't even the way it looked. It's the feeling that it noticed me first. That it was already there, already watching, before I ever understood I wasn't alone. I was pretty young when this happened, and to this day, I still cannot say for certain what it was. I think it was probably sleep paralysis, but even now, remembering it gives me chills. It was very early in the morning, somewhere around 5 a.m. Back then, I had this phase where I would wake up before sunrise to study. My parents had already gone out for their usual morning walk, and I was alone at home. I remember being unusually tired that day, and at some point in between studying, I must have drifted off without realizing it. Then, after who knows how long, I became aware of this strange feeling in my body. My arms and legs felt icy and numb, like all the strength had drained out of them. I wanted to move, I really did, but I could not. I remember struggling against it, trying to shift myself on the bed, and the only thing I could manage was dragging or rolling myself a little farther toward the middle. Across from my bed was the door that led out to the balcony. It was shut. And right beside that door, I saw something. Most of the details are gone now, blurred out by time, but a few things stayed with me. I remember its skin looking dark blue, almost unnatural, and I remember the way it was looking down at me. That stare is the part I never forgot. I do not know how long it lasted. It could have been seconds, maybe longer. But eventually, I felt the strength return to my body, and when I fully woke up, I realized I really had moved from where I first fell asleep. I had ended up in the center of the bed, exactly the way I had felt myself moving during that half-dream, half-paralyzed state. Nothing like that ever happened to me again. No other strange experience in that house. Nothing I could point to and call paranormal. But the reason this stayed with me is because, years before my experience, my mother had her own unsettling story about that same balcony door. She told me that one night she had a dream, or at least that is what she called it. She always made a point of locking the balcony door before going to bed. But in that dream, somehow the door was open, and something came into the room. She described it as completely black, shapeless, and unfamiliar, and she remembered a cold gust of air coming in with it. The detail that really got to me was this. The floor had newspapers scattered all over it that night because I had been working on something earlier. In her dream, she could hear the exact crisp, crinkling sound of footsteps pressing down on the papers, as whatever it was moved through the room. That experience was hers alone, and I never got many more details out of her. She does not like talking about these things at all. She is the kind of person who believes there are things we do not understand, but absolutely hates discussing them. Even when I was growing up, she would warn me not to stand out on the balcony too late at night, especially after dark, because it was outside, and to her that meant something. What unsettles me is not just my own experience, or hers by itself. It is the fact that both of us, completely separately, connected something strange to that exact same balcony door. And I never told her what happened to me. I knew she would shut the conversation down immediately. She always preferred to say, "There are no ghosts," even while clearly wanting certain things left alone. That was the attitude she raised me with too, so I mostly kept quiet. So maybe all of this really was coincidence. Maybe her experience was just a dream. Maybe mine was just sleep paralysis and a frightened mind filling in the blanks. That is what I still choose to believe. But even so, there is something deeply unnerving about the fact that years apart, both of us imagined, dreamed, or saw something coming through the same door. A long time has passed since then, and nothing else has ever happened to either of us. Still, every now and then, I think about that morning, that cold heaviness in my body, and that figure standing by the balcony, and it all comes back as clearly as if I were still lying there, unable to move, just staring. I've been dealing with sleep paralysis for close to 20 years now, and it still unsettles me every time. It usually happens maybe once or twice a month, sometimes more if I'm stressed or not sleeping well. Most of the time, it's the same pattern. I wake up just enough to realize I'm stuck. I can't move. I can barely breathe right, and I know exactly what's happening even though I'm still trapped in that half-asleep state. Usually, I don't see anything strange. For me, it's mostly just the physical feeling of being frozen. Over time, I kind of taught myself how to break out of it. I focus all my energy on trying to move the smallest part of my body, like a finger, my foot, whatever I can manage, and if I keep at it long enough, I can finally snap myself awake. But this time was different, and honestly, that's why I'm telling you about it. A couple hours ago, I had fallen asleep on my couch after watching a movie. My couch sits almost in the middle of my apartment, so from there I can usually make out most of the place. The television and my little work desk are off to the right. The bedroom door is straight ahead, and the kitchen and front door are off to the left. When I slipped into sleep paralysis tonight, I became aware of it right away. But instead of darkness or that usual blank feeling, I could see everything. Not vaguely either. I mean, I could see my whole apartment clearly, almost too clearly, like my eyes were fully open. It was almost like I had this wide, sweeping view of the room, more than I should have been able to see from where I was lying. And then I heard something. It sounded like an old television program playing somewhere nearby, like dialogue from a late-night rerun. My first thought, and this makes no real sense now, was that my mom must have the TV on in her room behind me. But that's impossible. My mom, Marlene, lives across town, and behind me was just the wall of my apartment. There was no room back there, no sound source, nothing. Eventually, I managed to pull myself out of it. I did the usual thing, tried to move, fought through that heavy frozen feeling, and finally woke all the way up. The second I did, the sound was gone. Completely gone. The apartment was quiet, and of course I was alone. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, mostly because I was rattled and needed to tell someone. It was late, so I expected her to be asleep, but she answered almost immediately. She asked if I was okay because I never text that late at night. Then she told me she was still awake because she couldn't sleep either, and she'd been watching an old sitcom. So I called her. I told her what had just happened, and I could hear the shift in her voice when she realized I wasn't joking. Then she said, "Wait, were the voices kind of like this?" And she held up the TV so I could hear part of the show she had on. It was exactly what I heard. Not kind of similar, not close. It was the exact same dialogue, word for word. I just froze. My whole body got that prickly, hair-standing-up feeling the second I heard it. And then, as if that wasn't strange enough, I started getting acid reflux during the call, completely out of nowhere. I haven't dealt with heartburn in years. I quit drinking about 2 years ago, and since then it's basically disappeared. But in the middle of talking to her, I suddenly felt that familiar burning rise up in my chest. Then my mom said, almost casually, that she was sorry for the noise in the background because she was digging through a drawer looking for antacids. She told me she'd started having really bad heartburn just before I called. I'm wide awake now, and honestly, I can't stop replaying it in my head. I keep trying to come up with a reasonable explanation, and maybe there is one, but right now, it just feels deeply strange. And I needed to say it out loud to someone, because keeping it in my head was making it even worse. I spent about a decade on active duty in the US Army, and my final posting was at this base that had been around for well over a century. It had that kind of old, heavy history to it. The housing area there was dated too. Most of the homes had originally gone up in the 1950s, and even though ours had been renovated, it still carried that old house feeling. At the time, my daughter Ellie was about 5, full of energy, always keeping us on our toes. I was working as a military police officer, mostly on night shift, so my schedule was upside down compared to everyone else's. This happened sometime in the dead of winter, probably late January, maybe early February. I just remember how bitterly cold it was. We also had 2 German shepherds, and they were very protective. Whenever I was at work, they'd sleep in the master bedroom with my wife. One morning, I got home a little after 6. I pulled into the driveway and immediately saw something that stopped me cold. Both garage doors were open. The front door was standing wide open too. Even the door from the garage into the house was open. That alone made no sense. We only really used the garage for storage, and I never came in that way. So I went inside, and the whole house was freezing. I mean freezing. But what really threw me was the dogs. Both shepherds were just sitting calmly in the living room. These dogs were not especially well trained, and if a door was open, they usually took that as an engraved invitation to bolt outside. But that morning, they were just sitting there, quiet, almost like they didn't even register that every exit in the place was standing open. I woke my wife and asked her why all the doors were open. She looked completely stunned and said she hadn't touched them. We checked the doorbell camera later, and it showed both garage doors opening at around 2:20 in the morning, at the exact same time. Not one after the other, together. And to make it stranger, the back door had also been left wide open. At the time, I brushed it off. I really did. I told myself there had to be some explanation, even if I couldn't come up with one. Then about a month later, something happened that changed everything. My wife and I were sitting up late one night in the kitchen area, which opened into what we'd turned into a second little living space with a couch and TV. My daughter's room was down a long hallway across from the kitchen, not directly visible from where we were sitting. It was around 11:30 at night, and we were just watching TV, winding down. Then one of the German shepherds stood up and walked toward the hallway. She started growling. Not barking, not restless, just that low, serious growl dogs make when they're focused on something. I got up and looked down the hall, but I didn't see anything. I told the dog to settle down and came back to sit with my wife. A moment later, we both heard it. It sounded exactly like our daughter laughing and running up and down that hallway. She had school the next morning, so I got annoyed more than anything. I stood up and called out, "Ellie, go back to bed." But the laughing didn't stop. It got closer. That's when the irritation dropped right out of me. I went into the hallway, expecting to catch her sneaking around, but there was no one there. So I opened her bedroom door, and she was in bed flat on her back, completely asleep. Dead asleep. I touched her arm and told her it wasn't funny, that she needed to stay in bed, but she didn't even stir properly. She was out. After that, things in the house started feeling worse. The dogs would growl at dark rooms, at corners, at spaces where there was nothing there. Certain rooms would turn so cold you could actually see your breath. Sometimes these awful smells would show up out of nowhere and then disappear just as fast. Eventually, we put in a request with base housing to move. It took some pushing, But after enough complaints, we were approved for another house. Later, after we were out of there, I did a little asking around. I found out we weren't the first family in that area to report strange things happening. And the family who'd lived in that house before us had moved out after only about a month. I didn't learn that until after we were already gone. I never felt like whatever was there wanted to harm us. That wasn't the feeling. It was more like we weren't alone in that house. Like something else had been there long before us, and for whatever reason, it was still there. Over the years, I've worked in a few houses that felt wrong in a way I still can't fully explain. Not just old house noises either. I'm talking about things moving when no one was around. Voices with no source. Footsteps where there should have been silence. Knocks coming from empty rooms. And, in one case, someone I saw with my own eyes who simply wasn't there. Every place had that same heavy feeling too, like the air itself was warning you to leave. The first one was in Los Angeles, back in 2014. It was an old place, built in 1901, originally owned by a well-off family. The current owner lived across the country in Boston and had hired me to restore the fireplace brickwork and repaint most of the first floor. He'd barely spent any time there himself, so he had no idea anything strange was going on. A couple of days into the job, I started hearing footsteps upstairs. At first, I thought somebody had gotten in somehow, maybe a squatter. I dropped everything and ran up there, ready to confront whoever it was. But there was nobody. The attic was locked, the windows were sealed, and there wasn't anywhere a person could have hidden. I checked everything twice. After that, it kept happening. I'd hear footsteps moving across the floor above me, sometimes even coming down the staircase behind me. Every time I turned around, nothing, no one there. I really started wondering if stress was getting to me. I tried to brush it off and keep working. Then one evening I had to stay later than usual, and that night was the worst of it. The whole house seemed alive with noise. The footsteps were constant, and at one point they sounded like they stopped right outside the room I was in. I didn't sleep a wink. Later, I managed to get in touch with a contractor who'd done structural work on the place years before. And before I could even finish describing it, he told me he'd experienced the exact same thing. I can't even tell you whether that made me feel better or worse. The second house was in rural Ohio in 2016. It had sat empty for years before an investor bought it. No one had really touched it since the previous owner lost it, and I got hired to handle a big renovation job that was mostly surface work. New paint, repairs, cleanup, that kind of thing. It was a great contract, honestly. Too good, maybe. About 3 weeks in, I looked up and saw a man standing on the second floor landing, looking down at me through the railing. He looked middle-aged, dressed in clothes that felt strangely out of time, like maybe late 70s or early 80s. I figured he was a prospective renter or someone connected to the property, so I waved and introduced myself, told him I was the one working on the house. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked into the bedroom behind him. Something in me said, "Follow him." I don't know why, but I went upstairs right away and stepped into that room. It was empty. Completely empty. Dust everywhere, untouched. No open windows, no back stairwell, no place for someone to slip out unseen. The man I'd just spoken to was simply gone. Because of what had happened to me before, I wasn't even shocked in the way I probably should have been. More unsettled than anything. Oddly enough, that was the only major incident there. Nothing else happened after that, and I never said a word to the owner. I figured he either wouldn't believe me or wouldn't want to. The third house was in Pittsburgh in 2021, when everything was shifting after COVID and people were moving all over the place. I'd relocated too, and I was juggling work on my own little fixer-upper while renovating a client's old Victorian home. One afternoon, I was redoing the bathroom when I heard voices downstairs. It sounded like two people having a quiet conversation. I assumed it was the owner and his wife stopping by, so I headed down to say hello and give them an update. No one was there, and the voices didn't trail off like people leaving. They just seemed to vanish into the house itself. By then, I'd already had enough strange experiences to force myself back upstairs and keep going. But when I got back to the bathroom, every single one of my tools was gone. For about 2 seconds, my brain just froze. Then I found them, neatly stacked in the room across the hall. Not scattered, not knocked over, stacked. Like someone had carefully picked them up and moved them. That one got to me. Really got to me. I left immediately, got in my truck, and called the owner. And that's when he admitted that he and his wife had also felt there was something off about the place. He said they'd noticed odd things too, but the house had been such a bargain that they overlooked it. He also admitted he hadn't said anything because he thought talking about it might scare off contractors. That was enough for me. I told him I was done, packed up what was left of my stuff, and took another job not far away in a house that, thankfully, kept its ghosts to itself. I still don't know what to make of any of it. Maybe there's an explanation for all three. Maybe there isn't. All I know is I've trusted my instincts a lot more ever since. Some houses creak, settle, and sigh. And then there are some that feel like they're watching you. I still do not really know how to talk about this without sounding completely unhinged, but I am going to try. A couple of nights ago, I went to New Orleans to meet up with some friends for St. Patrick's Day. I should say right up front, I have never been the kind of person who believes in the supernatural. No ghosts, no demons, none of it. At least, that was true before that night. I was out with friends. I will call them Dean, Jennifer, and their friend Mason. We started at a smaller parade in the French Quarter, and after that we drifted through a few bars. The last place we ended up was this little bar that felt strangely quiet for a holiday night. It was barely after midnight. St. Patrick's Day was still in full swing, and yet the place was almost empty except for us and one other table. At first, I just thought it was odd. Then the whole atmosphere started to feel off. Not dramatic at first, just wrong in a way I could not explain. I noticed this tall man in flashy gold boots come through the door. He walked in, made this slow loop around the room, and left. Then a minute later, he did the exact same thing again. Same path, same pace, same everything. The third time, he came in with a few other people, and they lined up near the wall and started moving together. I guess you could call it dancing, but it did not feel natural. It was too synchronized and too empty at the same time, like people trying to imitate being alive and almost getting it right. That was when the fear really started creeping in. I told my friends something felt wrong, but they brushed it off. They thought I was just tired or overwhelmed. Then I saw a guy come in carrying a pizza box and sit down at the bar. A little later, I saw him do it again, and again. And I do not mean someone who looked like him. I mean the same man, the same box, the same motion, like the room had hit some kind of loop and was replaying the scene over and over. At first, I tried to explain it away. I thought maybe I was missing something. Maybe people were messing around. Maybe I had too much to drink. But there was no variation. None. It felt like watching a moment get rewound and dropped back in place. Around then, another man at the bar started gesturing toward Dean like they knew each other. The way he acted was so familiar, so overly excited, like he had just spotted an old friend. Dean kind of laughed it off and played along, but later he told me he had never seen that guy before in his life. By that point, I was not just uneasy mentally. I felt sick, heavy. My whole body felt like it was picking up on something before my brain could make sense of it. I went to the bathroom just to get a second alone, but even there the feeling kept building. When I came back out, I told my friends we had to leave. They did not move right away, so I started toward the door by myself. And that was the moment everything tipped from strange into terrifying. As I walked out, I glanced toward the bar and caught the eyes of a couple of people inside. The second that happened, I felt this blast of fear that did not feel like normal fear. It felt cold and targeted, like something had noticed me noticing it. I stepped outside, and there was a small cluster of people standing there. I looked at one woman, just for a second, and this thought hit me so hard it almost knocked the breath out of me. Those are not people. And somehow, even worse than that, I felt absolutely certain they knew I had realized it. Once we finally left, I noticed the street was almost completely empty. That should not have been possible. A holiday night in the quarter should have been loud and crowded and full of people. But suddenly, it felt abandoned. I started crying and I could not stop. It was not embarrassment or stress. It was this crushing, oppressive feeling, like the air itself had turned hostile. Dean had his arm around me, trying to calm me down, when the man from the bar, the one acting like Dean's long-lost buddy, suddenly pulled up beside us in a black car. It came out of nowhere. He rolled up, screamed at us for a few seconds, then slammed on the gas and shot down the street so fast it barely looked real. As we got farther away from that bar, the heaviness started to lift. I could breathe again. I stopped crying. Then a few blocks later, it hit me one more time. Not as strong, but enough to make my stomach drop all over again. And then it passed. There were a few other things that happened too. Little details I still cannot fully explain. But even saying this much makes me feel ridiculous. Still, I know what I felt. I know how real it was. I have never experienced anything like that before, and honestly, I am still scared thinking about it now. Hey, I've been meaning to tell this story because even though it happened a long time ago, it still sticks with me in this really unsettling way. It's one of those things that your brain randomly pulls back up late at night, just to make your skin crawl all over again. So, back then, I was 18, and I had gone over to my boyfriend Adrian's house to spend time with him. He was 18 too. The whole atmosphere that day already felt wrong. He and his family were having a rough time, and the mood in the house was heavy from the moment I got there. It's hard to explain, but his house had always felt off to me. Not haunted in the dramatic movie way, just strange. Like the energy in there was never fully settled. Later that night, after I got home, I called him to check in and see how he was doing because I knew things had been with his family. We talked for a bit, and after a while he got sleepy. He asked if we could stay on the call while falling asleep because it made him feel better, and, of course, I said yes. We were on Messenger on my laptop, and I had a YouTube video playing quietly in the background to help me fall asleep too. I was also on my phone, half playing a game, half trying to wind down. Everything felt normal for a few minutes. Then, I suddenly heard a girl's voice say, very clearly, "Hello?" At first, I thought it came from the YouTube video. That was the only explanation that made sense. But the weird part was, the video had literally just ended. So I replayed it to check, thinking maybe I missed something or maybe it glitched. There was nothing. No voice. No hello. Nothing even close. And what made it worse was that the voice had an American accent. We're from the Philippines, so that detail really stood out to me. It made the whole thing feel even stranger, even more unnatural somehow. And this is the part where I probably made it worse for myself. I answered. I said, "Hello? Babe?" I honestly thought maybe Adrian was messing with me, or maybe he had woken up and said something weird into the mic. But after I answered, there was just silence. No response at all. That's when the fear really hit me. I checked Messenger right away. For some reason, my mind jumped to the most irrational possibilities. Like maybe he was talking to someone else. Maybe another call was open. Maybe there was some explanation I just wasn't seeing. But there was nothing. Everything looked normal. I hung up, and I swear panic just rushed through my whole body. I'm the kind of person who genuinely cannot handle scary things. Horror stuff doesn't entertain me. It wrecks me. Adrian knew that better than anyone. So after I ended the call, I messaged him right away and told him something creepy had happened. I was so shaken that I didn't even sleep in my room that night. I went and slept beside my mom because I just could not be alone. The next morning, I called him again and told him everything. And then, he told me something that made it even worse. He said that at around that exact same time, he had opened his eyes just slightly and saw some kind of figure move fast across the mirror in his room. Not standing there, not lingering, just this sudden motion, like something darting past. He also said that the entire night, he had this strong feeling that something was watching him. Nothing ever happened after that. It's been about a year now, and there hasn't been any other incident since. But every once in a while, my mind replays it, and I get that same cold feeling all over again. I still don't know what it was. Maybe there's some explanation for it. Maybe there isn't. I just know that in that moment, it felt real, and it scared me more than I can really put into words. I need to tell you about something that happened last night, because honestly, I still can't make sense of it. I went to bed a little after midnight, but I wasn't tired at all, so I just stayed up scrolling on my phone and half watching a show. It must have been around 1:45, maybe closer to 2, when the power suddenly cut out. Everything went black in a second. At first, it was just quiet. Then, maybe a few minutes later, the rain started. And not light rain either. I mean the kind that slams against the windows, with thunder shaking everything and flashes of lightning now and then. My door was locked. I was alone in my room, and even with my phone flashlight on, I just couldn't relax. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I got this awful feeling, like someone was staring at me from the dark. At one point, I even pictured a face in my mind, so clearly that it made me open my eyes right away. After that, there was no chance I was sleeping. Then I started hearing something. At first I thought it was just the storm messing with my head, but the sound got clearer. It sounded like two people talking, then laughing. I went completely still because I recognized the voices almost immediately. They sounded exactly like my friends Talia and Tessa. So clear, so normal, like they were right outside my room in the hallway, just sitting there talking like it was any other night. And weirdly, for a second, I actually felt relieved. I remember thinking, okay, they're awake too. I almost got out of bed. I almost unlocked the door and went to sit with them. But something about it didn't feel right. I can't explain that part properly. The storm was so loud, the whole house was dark, and still those voices sounded close and calm and familiar. But deep down, I just didn't want to open the door. So I stayed where I was, sitting on my bed, listening. The voices went on for a while. I can't say exactly how long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. Long enough that it stopped feeling like a random sound and started feeling real. They kept talking and laughing like nothing was wrong. At some point, I must have drifted off for a little while, because when I woke up again, it was around 5 in the morning. The power was back. The fan was running. But the light in my room was off. And that unsettled me immediately because I clearly remembered the room light being on before the power cut. I do not remember turning it off. Not at all. So I got up and stepped into the hallway. The hall light was on, and Talia was asleep on the sofa. Tessa wasn't there. Everything looked completely normal, like the night had reset itself and erased whatever had happened. I woke Talia up and told her to go sleep inside, and that was it. No weird voices, no strange feeling, nothing. But the next morning, I asked Tessa what they had been doing in the middle of the night, because I heard both of them talking and laughing for a long time. She just looked at me, genuinely confused, and said she never woke up. She told me she didn't even know the power had gone out. That's the part I can't stop thinking about, because I know what I heard. It wasn't distant. It wasn't unclear. It was their voices, clear as anything. And for one moment, I was this close to opening the door. I still don't know what I would have found if I had. I was 18 when I was drafted and sent to stay in military housing. I live in a country that still carries the bruises of an old dictatorship, and from the moment I arrived, that place felt like one of those bruises had been left open. The building was crumbling, damp, half-rotten, and so cold it felt personal. It looked like nothing inside had changed since the 1950s. Sleeping there was almost impossible. Time felt wrong in that building. You could lie down convinced you'd slept for hours, then check the clock and realize only 20 minutes had passed. None of us rested properly. There were sounds everywhere. Footsteps, knocks, murmurs, things that would wake you up and then vanish the second you tried to make sense of them. On my first day, we were walking in line in broad daylight when I felt my hand jerk backward, like someone had grabbed me. I turned around, annoyed, thinking somebody was messing with me. But I was at the very end of the line. There was no one behind me. No one close enough to touch me at all. The fear in that place didn't arrive all at once. It built itself slowly, then all at once, it was everywhere. In the first few nights, panic started spreading through the barracks. A couple of the others were terrified, truly terrified, saying they'd seen a man in some kind of mask. One of them swore he heard voices in another soldier's room, people talking about taking one of us away and torturing us. When they checked the room, it was empty. At first, I thought it was just stress, a joke, nerves, anything but real. But the fear became too serious to laugh off. Some of the guys set up little noise traps over the doors so they'd know if anything came in during the night. Nobody really slept. The cold was brutal. It didn't matter how many blankets you pulled over yourself. It never seemed to touch it. Then another endless night passed, and the next day everything somehow got worse. A friend of mine, Matteo, had the key to my locker for a while, and suddenly it was gone. Just gone. The whole day turned into this frantic, miserable search. We had to get that locker open, and the pressure in the room felt unbearable. While we were looking, someone found an old, rusted dagger. I still don't know how to explain that. It shouldn't have been there. It made no sense. We handed it over to the sergeants, and they gave us a lecture, accused us of bringing it in, but nothing more came of it. In the end, we had no choice but to force the locker open. And there it was. The key was inside. Inside the locker we had been trying to open the whole time, after we had all sworn it had been with us before. After that, I started falling apart. My arms and legs ached constantly. I barely slept. I had vivid dreams that clung to me long after I woke up. I started getting intrusive thoughts, dark ones, the kind I had never had in my life before. It didn't feel like myself. It felt like the whole place was soaked in dread, and some of it was getting into me. I tried to stay strong, but I got to the point where I could barely eat. My teeth hurt. My eyes watered for no reason. Food made me nauseous. Every training exercise seemed to wear my body down further, and nothing helped. Not the medicine, not the shots, not the rest I wasn't really getting. Then came the last night. I turned away and froze. I was trying not to bolt, trying not to make noise, trying not to alert the guards or wake anyone else. I kept telling myself it had to be sleep paralysis, exhaustion, stress, anything that would explain it. Anything except what it felt like. But it kept happening. He drifted backwards slowly, and then I sensed more of them. Shapes gathering behind the bunk beds, leaning in as if they were watching me. Little by little, they moved toward the wall, and then they were gone, dissolving into that black, rotten-looking haze. The next morning, I was sent home. My legs were injured badly enough that I couldn't continue training. What happened after that is the part that still stays with me the most. While I was recovering at home, I started searching out of curiosity, trying to find out whether anyone had ever died in that housing complex. I found a record of one case. During the dictatorship, sometime in the 1960s, a mayor from another city had been imprisoned there, tortured, and found dead with steel wire around his neck, tied to a wall valve. Then I kept scrolling, and I saw the crime scene photo. It was the same face. The exact same face I had seen that night. The same sadness, the same expression. I couldn't get it out of my head for days. But after a while, I stopped thinking of it as something that had come to threaten me. I started thinking maybe it had come to warn me. Like whatever remained there wasn't trying to harm me, but to show me what that place had been and what it still carried. My friend Mateo stayed longer and finished that part of his service. He didn't come out of it untouched. It left marks on him that had nothing to do with bruises or uniforms. He struggled with alcohol afterward. He saw awful things there, people trying to hurt themselves, people unraveling, nights filled with torment, and that same presence moving through the bunk room. So no, this isn't a story with a neat ending. It isn't the kind where everything gets explained and everyone walks away whole. What happened there felt bigger than one haunting. It felt like the violence of my country's past had soaked into the walls and stayed alive in some form, echoing through the people forced to sleep there. I still hope the souls tied to that place find peace one day. I hope the living do too. Because ever since then, I can't sleep in complete darkness, and Mateo can't either. And even now, sometimes it feels like those presences are still close. Not always cruel, maybe not even evil, but restless in a way that time never healed. Their suffering outlived their bodies. And some nights, it still feels like it knows exactly where to find us. I've never really known how to explain this properly, but I want to tell you exactly how it's been for me. When I was little, maybe 6 or 7, I used to wake up in the middle of the night sobbing, telling my family there was a little boy standing in my room. I was absolutely sure he was there, just watching me. It happened so often that my mom became really frightened for me. She had the house blessed, walked from room to room with holy water, burned sage, did everything she could think of to make whatever it was go away. But even after that, I still carried this awful feeling that I was being watched. As the years went on, we moved a few times. Some houses felt completely normal, but in others, that same feeling followed me. I'd hear quiet whispering now and then, catch shadows slipping past the corner of my eye, notice small things disappearing and then turning up in strange places. After a while, I almost taught myself to live with it. I stopped reacting. I told myself it was easier not to. Then, when I was about 13, things got worse again. At the time, my sister and I were sleeping in a converted shed at the back of the garden. It wasn't just somewhere we hung out, it was actually our bedroom. To get to the main house, we had to step outside and walk around, because there was no door connecting the two. The whole garden was fenced in, the gate stayed locked, and there were sensor lights outside. From the very first night, I felt uneasy. I remember lying there unable to settle, convinced someone was outside the window watching us. I kept hearing little sounds outside and checking the door over and over before I finally fell asleep. But the next morning, the door was standing open and the key was gone. Later, we found it in the far end of the garden, lying in the grass. That made no sense at all. My sister and I tried to laugh it off and come up with explanations, but honestly, none of them felt right. After that, strange things kept happening. The sensor lights would flick on and off for no reason. I'd hear whispers. The whole place felt wrong, like something was always just outside my view. Sometimes I got so unsettled that I'd go sleep inside the main house. One night, my sister was staying over at a friend's place, so I was alone out there. Earlier that evening, I'd left a plate on the counter. I was lying in bed, trying to drift off, when I suddenly got this crushing feeling that something was wrong. It felt like someone was standing just outside the window, staring in. I forced myself to look, but there was nobody there. Still, the feeling stayed. Then I heard the plate move. I turned and looked straight at it, and it was spinning on the counter like someone had just lifted it and dropped it. I didn't even think. I climbed out through the window, ran around the side of the house, and slept on the sofa inside. Even after that, it didn't stop. There were noises on the patio, footsteps outside, things shifting on their own. Eventually, we moved again, and for a while, everything went quiet. Later on, I lived in a few more places. Some were completely fine. In others, I still had the whispers, the shadows, things vanishing and turning up somewhere odd. But it never felt quite as intense as it had back then. Then, when I was 16, I moved into an old country house with a family friend. The house sat in a tiny village, very isolated, and I was helping her at a riding stable during the day and watching her children in the evenings. Out of everywhere I've ever lived, that house was the worst. When I was there alone, it was worse. I'd hear a baby crying upstairs in an empty house. Other times it sounded like heavy footsteps or something huge being dragged across the floorboards. There was one bedroom where I kept hearing voices, a man and a woman, low and muffled, but I could never make out a single word. Things disappeared and came back. Decorations turned up in different rooms, and for some reason, I kept finding black feathers inside the house, in places no bird could possibly have reached, like the bathroom or closed bedrooms. Then one afternoon, I took a photo in the hallway mirror. The mirror faced a window behind me, so you could see the reflection of it in the picture. A few days later, I looked at the photo again and saw a little boy standing in that window behind me. He had fair hair, skin so pale it almost looked gray, bright red cheeks, and no eyes. The window was on the second floor. There was no possible way anyone could have been standing there. About a week later, I went to show the photo to a friend, and it was gone. Not just deleted from one place, gone from everything. It wasn't on my camera roll, it wasn't on Snapchat, and I'd even sent it to the woman I was living with, but it had vanished from our messages too. It was like it had never existed at all. What still unsettles me is that when I moved out, the activity in that house stopped for her too. Everything just went quiet again. And now, recently, something has started again. A couple of nights ago, I was staying in a hotel. I had this incredibly vivid dream about an elderly woman I'd never seen before. We were sitting together talking quite calmly, and then I heard this rattling sound. She looked straight at me and said, very clearly, "Someone is trying to get into your room." I woke up instantly. The door handle was shaking. I got out of bed and went to the peephole, but the second I reached it, the noise stopped. There was nobody there. Since that night, the whispers have come back stronger than before. The shadows don't always stay at the edge of my vision now. Sometimes it feels like I see them properly. For most of my life, I learned to live with this. It stopped scaring me the way it used to. But this feels different, heavier, closer. And honestly, when I tell you all of this, I still don't know what I believe. Part of me wonders whether something has been with me since I was small. Part of me thinks there must be another explanation I just can't see yet. I only know that whatever this is, it's followed me for years. And lately, it feels like it's found me again. I've just come back from spending a week at this beautiful old country manor, and honestly, I still can't stop thinking about it. The house dates back to around the mid-1500s, so it carries that kind of deep, lived-in history you can almost feel in the walls. I was there with my husband, our 2 children, and my mother and father, and because it sits way out in the countryside, the nights are unbelievably still. The kind of silence that feels heavier once the sun goes down. We'd actually stayed there once before. During that first visit, there was only one moment that really stood out. In the middle of the night, both my husband and I heard what sounded exactly like one of the children coming to our bedroom door. We both noticed it, but when we checked, there was nobody there. Other than that, it was mostly just this strange feeling at night, like the house changed character after dark. But this last visit felt different, stronger somehow. It started with me waking up at around 3 in the morning because I was sure my husband was tapping me lightly on my side. But when I turned, he was fast asleep, facing the other direction. I told myself not to overthink it, rolled over, and tried to forget about it. Then it happened again, and again. A few nights in a row, I kept waking to that same feeling, like someone was trying to get my attention. Around the same time, the bathroom light started making this sharp buzzing sound and flickering whenever I went in there. I tried to be practical about it. The manor is ancient after all, and old houses have their quirks. Faulty wiring felt like the sensible explanation. Then came the part that really unsettled me. One night, I had this incredibly vivid experience, somewhere between sleep and being awake. I could hear someone calling for me. Not casually, but with real urgency. And at the same time, it felt like something else was with me, warning me not to respond. It was so strong, so clear, like I was being told, "Do not go, no matter what." Even though I desperately needed the bathroom, the feeling was almost commanding me to stay where I was and wait until morning. It left me shaken, but I kept it to myself. I didn't want to frighten the children or make the whole house uneasy. The next day, though, I was talking with my mom, and she told me that during the night she had heard someone calling, "Mom, Mom," as if a child needed her. She got up, checked on everyone, looked in on the children, and they were all asleep. She couldn't find anyone who'd made the sound. That was when I told her about what I'd experienced. And the moment we compared notes, it stopped feeling like imagination and started feeling like something we couldn't easily explain. Then, on the final night, I was lying near the edge of the bed, half asleep, with one shoulder slightly uncovered. And I felt it, very clearly. Something touched me and slowly traced a finger from my shoulder down along my arm. My husband was still asleep beside me, turned away. I didn't scream. I didn't move straight away. I just pulled myself further onto the bed, tucked myself in tightly, and lay there until sleep finally came back. I can't really explain any of it. Maybe there's a reason for every moment. Maybe there isn't. But I know what I felt, I know what I heard, and I know I've never experienced anything quite like that anywhere else.